Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 425. I am so excited for today's guest. We have back on the show Daniel Louzonis. Daniel was in episode 258. That was a really impactful interview. I actually went and after I did that interview, I went and listened to it 3 times because I listened to it with my husband, I listened to it with my mother-in-law, and then I can't remember who else I listened to it with, but I listened to it with other people and we would pause it and then have a discussion about it and then play it again. And it's one of those interviews that really sticks in my mind because I have a child, because I've thought about the impact of homeschooling versus having my child be in a school system, in a schoolhouse with 30 children and 1 teacher. And I've been thinking about that for a long time. And so interviewing you was really eye-opening. And then I heard from other listeners that it was also very eye-opening. And when the COVID-19 thing started to happen, they shut down the schools in my state, in the state of Washington, and now it's basically summertime. It is now, they started summertime in March, and the children will not go back to school till September. And the teachers are, because I'm friends with the teacher that teaches public school, and the teachers are worried that they're not even going to be able to go back to school in September, that this is going to keep going. And so there's mass panic with parents because they're sitting at home with their kids doing distance learning. Crisis schooling is what I've heard, this new term being thrown around, crisis schooling. Many parents are now turning to homeschooling. All the homeschooling Facebook groups I'm in are flooded now with new parents wondering what curriculum should they follow. Should they join an online school? Should they just let their kids have a summer? Like there's, so many questions are being thrown around, and you are an expert in homeschooling. So I definitely recommend listeners check out episode 258 with Daniel to get his amazing story. But I want to jump right in. Well, first of all, I definitely want to hear what you've been up to since I had you on the show, because I know that you've been up to a lot. But I also really want to speak to the parents that are going through this crisis right now, where many of these children their school year ended abruptly, and they're at home, and the parents have to figure out how to do some form of education with their children because of COVID-19. And there's other reasons why people are choosing to go to homeschooling. Some parents didn't choose to; it was thrust upon them. But some parents have chosen to go to homeschooling in the last year because of vaccine laws, for example. So there's been a very large shift, a very large movement towards homeschooling, especially in this digital age. It becomes easier. Daniel, welcome back to the show. I can't wait for this very enlightening discussion, and I hope that we're able to empower those parents who feel that they're in crisis right now.
Well, it's great to be here. We've been talking, you and I have been talking back and forth about when I was going to come on next, and we have a crisis reappearance. The urgency came, and everybody is now a homeschooler. Everyone now is a remote learner and a distance learner and a homeschooling parent. And you put that in the context of all the other things going on, right? So transitioning to homeschooling is difficult. Oftentimes the kids are reluctant, the spouse may not be supportive, grandparents, in-laws do what in-laws do, and they're just always unsupportive. And so in peaceful times, it's difficult for most people to transition. And now you have the economic and financial stress and the fear that people have of, at least where I live, of basically everyone. Everyone that walks within 6, 7, 8, 10 feet of you. And oh, by the way, now you have to figure out how to educate your kids. So it is crisis is the word they're using, and nobody wants to hear the positive spin on it. But I will say right off the bat that this is not homeschooling. Okay, homeschooling You can actually go to the park. You can actually go to the museum. You can actually travel. We were trying to go to Florida a few weeks ago, and we weren't going to go because the beach was closed and the hotel pool was closed. And so I hope your audience doesn't do what some people are doing, is conflating what's going on now with actual homeschooling. I've heard people say, well, I could never homeschool because my kids are crazy at home and I this and that and all these other reasons, that all these other complicated reasons. But this is not homeschooling. This is not even living as far as I'm concerned.
This is captivity. We're getting a taste of what the animals at the zoo feel like. Right
Zoocosis is what they call it.
Zoocosis.
Are you familiar with that?
No.
So zoocosis is something that anybody listening should go Google and just get the dictionary, standard dictionary definition of it, and maybe even click on a couple links. But all these animals in the zoo, it's well known that they're miserable. And what do animals taken out of their natural habitat, any animals, do when they're miserable? They mutilate themselves. They get depressed. All the zoo animals, this is a well-established fact, these zoo animals are getting injected with Prozac and the like all over the world because they need to sedate them. They have trouble getting them to mate. And so zoocosis, when I first read about this, I said, OMG, this is school. These kids don't want to sit still in school, and they're medicating them just to pound that square peg into a round hole. And it's an unnatural environment. It's not natural to have kids wearing shoes all day when they're 5 and 6 and sitting all day and being indoors. This is not natural. And what you see in school is just a human form of zoocosis. So it's definitely worth checking out, looking into.
Very interesting. Well, I mean, I'm from Canada. We call it cabin fever. And cabin fever is serious. It's like if you're snowed in for a few weeks, man, you want to tear the paper off the walls. Like you need to get out. We're meant to be out there, and children are definitely meant to be out. I can't remember what country did this, but they were able to cut ADD rates and ADHD, like they were able to cut it so significantly, it would blow your mind. They increased recess to 2 hours a day, and ADD went down significantly. That was one. And then there was another study where they increased sleep by, and this is my friend who's a first grade teacher, increased sleep in children by 30 minutes, just going to bed 30 minutes earlier. And 60%, I believe, is what he told me, they were able to cut down the ADD symptoms. So it's like sleep and exercise, people. Like, we're making children sit in a room all day, and they've cut down recess in a lot of schools, and then they get to medicate the children because the children are going crazy because they're stuck indoors. They got zoocosis.
So we've already got huge overlaps here with everything. The other study talks about, and there's an actual movement afoot to get schools to have later start times, and they're finding that if the kids, it's a little bit of fool's gold. They're finding that if they have the high schoolers start later, because basically in school districts, the high school kids are expected to go to school early because they can get up earlier. Then the buses, they want to use the same buses for the middle school and the elementary school. So they don't all start at 9 o'clock. They don't all start at 8:30. It's a staggered start. And they're finding that once they delay the start of school, that not only in these schools has academic performance gone up, but school suspensions have gone down. Now that's just one study, and I don't think it's actually tenable, because as the kids stay, everyone who has teenagers know, they sleep in later, they'll stay up later, they'll just spend more time and they'll have more energy at midnight to be on social media. but with ADHD, homeschoolers, I mean, I've known this for over a decade. I can't tell you how many parents I've heard this say, my kid needed the ADHD medicine when they were in school. Once I pulled them out, they didn't need it. And the other thing about fidgety kids in school outside of their natural environment, they're finding standing desks are going a long way towards behavioral control, focus, and all that. And you can Google the guy in California, Kelly Starrett. He's got a whole movement about trying to get schools to have more stand-up desks. And they're also finding that if, say, a 7-year-old kid is anxious, if they let him lay on the floor in his stomach, that he's totally fine. But if they force him to sit in a chair, his behavior is off the wall. And the reason that one of the reasons I've heard bantied about is that something about core strength, and these kids, they can't sit or whatever. But there's a huge overlap between physical health and academic performance, physical health and what goes on in the brain. I mean, this is just, it's so underappreciated. If you ask Richard Branson, the billionaire, why he's so successful, he says, because I work out. He said, because I work out, I have an extra hour a day of energy and leverage and all that. And every single one of these high performance experts is hacking their body to almost an extreme extent. And you touched on it already. They have removed recesses from schools. When I was a kid, we had 3 recesses in school. And before you know it, it was down to 2, then it was down to 1. And now I hear some schools don't have any recess whatsoever. And even beyond recess, kids used to walk to school. And there is research that shows that kids who walk to school have better grades. Wow. Oxygen flowing to the brain, a little bit of movement, and they have better. It doesn't matter whether they're rich or poor, walking to school is highly correlated with academic performance. Not to say that academic performance is going to set you up for life. I can tell you firsthand that having an Ivy League degree doesn't guarantee you anything in this world. But that's a whole. I mean, we can open up a lot of. There'll be so many cans of worms opened up here, so many Pandora's boxes that we're going to be on air for about 24 hours straight if we don't focus ourselves.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do a marathon. Let's do a 24-hour marathon about homeschooling. I think we could do it. I'm just remembering all the grades where I walked to school. Or biked to school. I was about a half an hour for me to get to junior high, for me to get from grade 5 and up was about a half an hour, I'm thinking. And then I was about 15-minute walk for me to get to grade 1 and 2. And then high school was only about a 7-minute walk. But for me, those walks to school woke me up. And I remember the walks home helped me de-stress, especially the long ones. Even though I kind of like, oh man, I wish I could be home right now. I would either ride my bike or rollerblade or walk, depending on the weather. And it really helped me. It was just the solitude. It would help me to decompress from my day because I had a lot of social anxiety and I was bullied. And it would help me just to like work it out. And so by the time I got home, I felt refreshed. I felt emotionally recharged. And so that time after to be able to just move your body really helped me. And then in college, I drove to college, and I remember just feeling sleepy the whole morning because I just wake up, get in my car, and go. And I missed that. I missed that moving my body in the morning, having to walk there. So yeah, that does make a lot of sense.
Well, cars are killers. There is some, if you think about it, you could, and I've heard people say this, but television, passive video consumption, and the car, what they've done, those 2 innovations, if we can call them innovations, what they've done to the human body is pretty bad. And you could almost get rid of all that stuff if you turn off the TV or throw it out and don't get in a car. I mean, I moved to London 6 years ago, and I was already pretty thin, and I lost 26 pounds because I didn't have a car. I wasn't sitting at 90 degrees with my stomach disengaged for 2 to 2.5 hours a day. And, people used to be really thin. They used to walk everywhere. They used to walk to school, uphill in the snow both ways. They used to walk, nowadays the kids are getting chauffeured to school, door to door. The bus used to drop kids off at bus stops where kids would walk to, a quarter of a mile, whatever. The buses started picking up kids right on their doorstep, especially in wealthier areas like where I live in the New York area. And there's reasons for it. People think it's safer, it's less of a liability. But these kids are going from a bed to a chair for breakfast to 90 degrees sitting on a bus to sitting in a desk all day long.
Mm-hmm.
And they're never, ever getting that chance to decompress in nature, never getting a chance to exercise their body and be in nature like at all. Could be for a month or two. Might be by accident.
Yeah, it's such a shame. Well, so you over the years have become an expert in teaching parents how to homeschool in a way that best supports their child in their education. And I don't want to get too much into your bio because I want listeners to go back and listen to episode 258. But your experience with your two children's wonderful. And now you've been coaching for a long time, parents, and even parents who say, I don't know if I can do it. My child is too hyper, or my child is this, or my child's that. And there's a way to shape homeschooling for each individual child. But before we get into talking about this crisis and what we can do now, I'd like to just catch up. What has happened? What has transpired since we had you on the show in episode 258?
Well, I was trying to figure out what date that was, but
It
I will
was
say that
about 2 years ago.
Okay, so the last 2.5 years, we've lived in Manhattan. So 2.5 years ago, or about maybe 2 3/4 years ago, we were living in a 4,000 square foot home or 3,500 square foot home in suburban Long Island, and I knew there was something missing. It was suburban life. It was driving all day to homeschooling activities, then driving around to the community activities, the soccer, the dance, the karate. And I was going nuts. And my kids were about 10 and 11 or 11 and 12 years old. They're at that stage where they need some autonomy. And so I did this radical thing. There were other reasons too. Well, health reasons. My wife was commuting into Manhattan, and it was basically she was getting up at 4 a.m., going to cross or getting up at 4:15 to go to CrossFit for 5, to get on a train at 6:50 to go into Manhattan, an hour commute there just about, and then coming back late at night. And I just knew that wasn't good for her body, wasn't good for our relationship, anything. And so there were about 5 reasons that were all pointing towards me selling this big house. And another reason was I believed the stock market was going to crash. So the real estate market was going to crash. So it was an aggressive financial bet. So I sold the house for an insane amount of money, and we moved 3 minutes away from my wife's office.
Oh, that's awesome.
Right next to the World Trade Center. And her commute went to 3 minutes, 2 elevators. If it rains, she just doesn't even grab an umbrella. She's a risk taker. She thinks she can duck under and make it, as she did this morning. And my kids, like I said, they were like 10, 11, and 12. I wanted them to be able to walk places. So we moved into Manhattan next to the World Trade Center, a place that 10 years ago, I never would have thought I'd move next to the World Trade Center, especially seeing how my wife was downtown when the towers fell.
Oh, jeez.
And but things change, that your mindset changes, and your approach to certain types of risk changes. But my kids could walk to playgrounds. They could walk to Barnes and Noble. They could walk to the deli and buy something that they shouldn't be eating. But my daughter could. Soccer practice is 9/10 of a mile away, right up the Hudson River. And at 11 years old, she was riding her scooter up the river with a bunch of her teammates every single day, 4 days a week. And I said, try to put a value on me not having to drive my daughter to soccer. I was literally, talking about health, I was literally ready to blow my brains out at all the driving and the chauffeuring that I had to do. And so I killed so many birds. I killed a whole flock of birds with this one move. And it was the best thing that I did. And of course, we're living in an expensive, tiny apartment, which has, it has its own challenges. But even in New York City, I wanted my kids to work. And I could already see that there was more work in New York than there is in the suburbs. There's this expression, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. And I actually disagree with that. I actually think it's easier to make it in New York. If you want to work 9 days a week, 30 hours a day in New York, you can do it. You could, a 1-bedroom apartment here in my building, a 1-bedroom is $4,000 a month.
Jeez.
You could even pay 5, but that's a 1-bedroom. But the reality is you could walk dogs just in this building and more than pay your rent. So, so, so even though the cost to be here is high, the opportunity is even bigger. And my kids, they've been working. Let's see, since we last spoke, my son wrote a book titled "Kid Trillionaire: How a Little Kid Can Make a Big Fortune," and it's just that. It's about how kids can make money. Like, what's the template? What's the process? What do they have to start doing? Stop doing? Who do they have to follow? All these things. It's a terrific, terrific book, Kid Trillionaire. And we didn't put it on Amazon. The only way he was selling it was he was standing on 6th Avenue with a table. And I wanted him to stop heads, talk to people, figure out how to deal with, whoever would talk to him. And so he spent many, many hours over the last couple of years on the streets of Manhattan selling his book hand to hand. And he sold, I believe, over 1,200 copies of his book now. And not only that, he also got all sorts of media attention. So he was instantly on several TV stations. He had a full-page article about him in the New York Post. And this is what is possible when you operate with extreme flexibility outside the system. You can literally move where you want to move. How many times have you heard somebody say, I don't want to move to disrupt my kid's social life, or we moved into this house because of the school system? Like, we've never been beholden to any limiting beliefs like that. Mm-hmm. We moved to London for 15 months, and our school goes with us. We go to Florida in the winter for a month or 5 weeks or so, and our school is totally uninterrupted. Nothing changes. They have libraries down there. We'll bring the piano keyboard. We'll do our math and our chess and our reading, and we'll go to the park at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock when all the other kids are out of school. We'll go to the beach or whatever. And something I want to point out here, I might have pointed out in the last episode, was that I had 2 young kids, and we go to Florida in the winter from Boston, and it takes a massive bite out of the winter. And for 3 years, I had 2 little kids. They didn't have a sniffle or a cold between them, and I attribute that to a couple things. One, being able to go down to Florida and get out of the stale indoor air of like a frigid New England, and also they're not going to school, which people are seeing more and more now that they're a petri dish, they're germ factories. Yep. And somehow nobody knew that 6 weeks ago. So that's a little bit of what we've been doing. That's John. And let me just say, Christine, she's 13 years old now, and she's a little hustling entrepreneur herself. And a year ago, she said that she wanted to go with her soccer team to France. And it was a summer trip during the Women's World Cup in the summer. Now, going to Europe in the summer is expensive. World Cup tickets, and then they're going to mark this thing up because that's what they do. Nobody organizes trips for free. And $4,000, we said, sure, if you go make the money, you can go. What do you know? In about a few months, she put ads up on the building forums. I'll babysit, I'll mother's help, I'll teach her kids piano. And she made that money within, I would say, 4 or 5 months. And that was just the start of it. And then since then, she, even though I'm against all the smartphones and stuff, she bought her own for $800 with her own money. And so my kids now, they are fully launched entrepreneurs. Like, I don't have life insurance or more than, $50,000 worth. My life insurance, my wife's life insurance, is that we're arming our kids with, we're making them future proof. We're making them socially intelligent, resourceful. And at this stage of our homeschooling with, teenagers, our focus is strictly on entrepreneurship. They're not going to go to college. And I'm not paying for it. They'd have to pay for it themselves, which I don't think they would do. But what makes my homeschooling philosophy very unique is how aggressive we start out. We start out with up to 3-hour math sessions when they're 4 years old. Well, that's what I did with my kids, at least. Very aggressive early on. Very strict with the screens, like no TV, no video games. And then at the end, so an aggressive start and also an aggressive end. And the end game is where a lot of homeschooling families lose it. And they have 18-year-old kids who are well-rounded and smart and have hobbies and this and that, but they don't really have any vocational skills. They don't really have any interest in the economy. And therefore, the college becomes like a default choice, and they just get sucked in. They're more well-rounded, they're more mature, whatever, but they're still getting sucked in to the college system, which, look, I went to the University of Pennsylvania. I mean, I have an Ivy League education, And I didn't major in impractical things. It was math and economics. I was trading derivatives and futures like right out of college in 1995. And I can tell you, they don't really teach you anything about business, even in the top schools. So I'm very pro parent, very pro education. I'm very anti, outsourcing it, right? Like you can't outsource. There's certain things that you can't outsource that you have to do yourself. And far too many people believe that they can outsource the raising and education of their kids. It would be great if I could punt my kids out the door and they came back mature and well-rounded and civilized. But unfortunately, what goes on in the schools has gotten so bad. And I talk about, we can talk about this, the last 10 years, it has escalated.
It's so
it has
bad.
gotten so much worse with the iPhone. It has gotten so much worse. And on the other hand, with the internet, with podcasts, with the bounty of the information age, with the ability to connect with anybody on the planet, with the ability to get chess lessons from a grandmaster in India for $10 an hour. Why, the chasm between going in one direction and in the other, going to college, going the traditional route versus, going hard on entrepreneurship, like Gary Vaynerchuk style, or like Mark Zuckerberg was a dropout, Michael Dell was a dropout, Steve Jobs was a dropout, Bill Gates was a dropout. People are kind of missing it, that the most successful people on this planet cannot attribute their success to education. And there's a whole new breed of people out there, like the next Bill Gates and Zuckerberg and Michael Dell. They're not going to be kids who went to college for a year and dropped out. They're going to be kids who never even went to school in the first grade. I have a friend I have a good friend, and she's homeschooled her kids for years. She got her son applied to MIT and Stanford, got into both, didn't even think about going to them. The only reason he applied to those schools was because grandma for years was saying, you're not getting an education, and nagging mom and dad they should be in school. So MIT and Stanford actually applied to him. It wasn't the other way around. They applied to him and he rejected them. But I have stories because of what I do. I have stories and anecdotes like this, like one after another, after another, after another. And nobody's really put them all together. Like it's always between the cracks, and it's always, people aren't seeing it. But the kids who are educated outside the school system are dominating almost basically everything. In terms of chess, for example, half of the top youth chess players in America are homeschooled. Half. I mean, they can't. You literally can't compete with the kids who are sitting home all day playing 11 hours a day and using chess engines. Spelling bees have been dominated by homeschooled kids for ages. Writing contests, you name it. The school system is proving to be an assembly line from a bygone industrial era that is no longer compatible with the goals it really never was compatible with the highest goals that parents have for their kids. And it doesn't have any chance, or it precludes any chance of our kids discovering, no less reaching their full potential. So like in the last 10 years, there's a whole new reason to homeschool. And I'm not even going to get into Corona. I won't even put that one in there, or the forced vaccination schedule that's going to come. But you can't control the technology in your kids' lives.
Yeah.
When all their friends have smartphones. If you were to go back in time 20 years and say, hey, we're going to give every kid, every 12-year-old boy, a device in their pocket, 24-hour television, 24-hour video game console.
No way. There would absolutely not. We would say no way.
And it also has a stack of porno magazines that goes to the moon.
Yeah.
So that is all, now go around and try to count how many parents, even if you don't give your kid a phone, their peers all have it. And it has become pretty much the dominant social force. So there are 20 reasons to homeschool your kids, whether they're getting bullied or whether they're going to be a tennis prodigy or whatever. Any one of these 20 reasons to homeschool is sufficient all by itself. But the new one is now you can't control the tech in their lives, and therefore you can't control, a lot of other things. But go ahead.
Their lives are at stake. When we look at ages, I believe it was 10 to 24, this range, that suicides went up by 60% in the last 10 years. It's the second leading cause of death in that generation. Basically, in school-age children, suicide is the second cause of death. I don't know what the first one is. And that's ridiculous. Suicide is on the rise so much, and these are children who it shocks the parents. Because they're able to be constantly bullied. Like with me, like I was bullied as a child, but like I said, though, those walks home, I could decompress. And then when I was home, I was away from the bullying, and I could call my best friend, and I could go escape into a book, or like I could turn on the TV or do my homework or talk to my parents, and I could go bike riding with my neighbor. Like I could escape for hours until the next day. Whereas now children are bullied 24 hours a day because they all have these devices, and it's nonstop for them. So that, I mean, that's just one reason why the environment of school is completely different than when you and I, because I went to school in the 80s. I'm 40, and I've talked to some teachers, and they said that in the last 10 years the children are different. And one of my friends who's been a teacher for 20 years, and he has 3 kids of his own, and I've talked to other teachers who have been teachers longer, and they said that that the children are different. That that maybe it's because they have tablets. Maybe it's because like they don't have the recess. They have the tablets. They watch way more TV. They're way more sedentary. They have the ability to constantly chatter with each other through cell phones and through devices. It's sort of like the key latch kid of our generation, where I'd come home, I had a key to the house, I'd walk home, and I'd be, 10, 13 years old, somewhere around there, and no one was home until my parents got home, later in the day. And so we had to learn how to, make our own snacks and, do our own thing. But we were independent at a very young age. And these children are also independent because the parents, in a way, the kids are going off and using these devices, and the parents aren't part of it. There isn't an adult looming over them monitoring the situation. And so we're just seeing in the classroom there's way more bullying, there's way more back talk, there's way more defiance. The children are just rude. They're
Let me
becoming
jump in here
violent.
for
It's crazy.
1 second. So you're going to have people listen to me. I've been me for a long time, and they're going to hear things like 3-hour math sessions when they're young, aggressive. You're going to hear, let them enjoy their childhood. And I've heard it a lot without going into how I want them to enjoy their adulthood too, or that whole argument. People say, kids aren't developmentally ready to read until a certain age. And I completely disagree with almost everybody who says it. They have their mind made up.
My
And
son,
so
my son, when he was 18 months old, this is when most children like don't form sentences. Like they can say words like car, like ka, like, oh, it's a car. My son at 18 months old knew the entire alphabet backwards and forwards. We could pick random letters, and he would pick it up, and he'd be able to say, this is a C, this is a D, this is a Z. He could say all of them, uppercase and lowercase. And we weren't doing 3-hour English sessions with him. We were just actively playing with him with letters. And like, I was just blown away that an 18-month-old knew all the letters, and then was able to start recognizing more than letters, was able to start recognizing words. And by the time he was 2.5, he was writing his name. He was holding a pen and writing his name. And then I met a 4-year-old. A friend of mine has a 4-year-old who at age 4 did not know what an A was, did not know what a B was, wouldn't recognize any part of the alphabet. And she was just waiting to put him in public school. And I was like, this is like, if every child has the potential to know the alphabet at 18 months old, and it's not like he was having fun, it was play. He wasn't suffering. But if every child could know the alphabet at 18 months, could start to read and write by 2.5, and love it and enjoy it, and it's fun for them. Like, and then by the time they're 3 or 4, reading complete books and enjoying it and loving it, like, why not? Like, what are we doing wrong that children are suffering, and there's this like all of a sudden they start hating learning and they start
Well, here,
pushing back.
those are huge, great topics because, like, if you, as you know, well, first of all, the next time someone says a kid's not developmentally ready for reading, to read now, why don't you say, well, they're not developmentally ready for the iPad or the television, but that's not stopping you either, right? Like,
Mm.
those are dangerous things. But about loving, to read and loving your letters. My daughter she had her letters and she'd carry them around with her all the time, and I definitely fondly remember those years, so 10 years ago. But if a child, well, if anybody hates exercise and nutrition, what is their body going to look like? I mean, this is just like so obvious. People understand the health analogies, and I always go back to them. If you hate healthy food and you hate to exercise, and people say, I hate to run, I hate this, I hate vegetables. Well, what's your body going to look like? Well, what if you hate to learn? What if you hate to read and write and think and focus? What is your whole entire life going to look like? And unfortunately, like that's like the essence of education, right? Like, you're never going to achieve anything in life. You're never going to even scratch the surface of your potential, your God-given potential. If you hate to think and learn and read and write and meet people and experiment, you don't even have a chance. But what school does is it makes kids hate to read. It makes them associate reading with coercion, with obligation, with sitting inside, with conformity, with all these stifling, activities. And they say that, and this isn't proven. This is just like internet stuff. They say that 40% of college graduates will never read another book. And then when I first read that, I said, well, that's true. After I graduated college, I didn't read a book until I was about 29 or 30 years old. And that's luckily, I actually discovered reading on my own, and I discovered that books were extremely fascinating, and they could solve all my problems and open doorways to every path of abundance on this planet. And that life's treasure really is in books. But sadly, these kids are leaving the educational system with not just an unwillingness to read, but like active bibliophobia. Stand next to my son on 6th Avenue, and when people say, hey, what's going on? Hey, who are you? Whatever. And he'll say, oh, I have a book here. You will see them actually take 2 steps back. The concept of a book is scary to people. And, in my world, Satan has won. If you've got somebody, like, what worse oppression can you will upon someone than making them think that they're not intelligent, making them think that effort won't be rewarded, in closing their mind. I mean, that's like, they don't have to be in a prison. They're in a prison. They've got their hands cuffed. They're in a straitjacket forevermore, unless something shocks them into like a resurrection or some type of reincarnation or invigoration.
Wouldn't it be amazing if we all picked up a book? Like, most of us are isolated at home. We don't have much to do. The parks are closed, the movie theaters are closed, the restaurants are closed. We shouldn't go visit anyone. Like, if we all picked up a book and reinvigorated the love of learning and love of reading, that would make this COVID-19 thing, it might make it worth it. This whole, like, I mean, just, I don't know. There's a lot of bad going on, but let's focus on the good, because, like, we can't control. It's out of our control. So instead of feeling helpless, let's focus on what we can control. And what we can control is the environment right now that our children are in, and also our own mental environment, our internal environment. And so if we could all do things like pick up books and remember how much reading is fun. So I know that in the last year or so, your business has really taken off because of the vaccine laws in your area. That well, some states, not just it was because of the measles, right? That parents took their children out of school for multiple reasons. Some they're not again they're not for vaccines, but some parents they had to because their children were would be harmed from the vaccine because they were known to be susceptible, and so they had no choice other than to start homeschooling. Tell us about that journey.
So I believe it started in California, where I think California got rid of the religious exemption
Mm-hmm.
for vaccines. So in other words, kids go to school, they have to get punctured, I don't know how many dozen times, how often. And California, there was always a loophole that said if you have religious reasons to not get it, you could still go to school. And New York followed suit. I believe it was in August this year. So school in New York starts in September. So in August, this law came out, and there were all these families that under no circumstances were going to we're going to get their kids vaccinated and sent to school. And it was public school and private school. So there was a little bit of a tyranny. There was nowhere to hide except in homeschooling. And they're all reluctant homeschoolers, much in the way that all the COVID-19 parents have become reluctant homeschoolers. And the number of homeschoolers in Manhattan or New York City, it doubled. We usually grow 5% a year or whatever. There's a lot of organic growth every year in homeschooling, and there has been since 1980, but it doubled. I mean, 100% increase in the number of people homeschooling in New York City.
Because of the
And that was shocking.
measles, because of the
Well, I would
removal
say
of the religious vaccination.
yes, it doubled. And so what you had all these people who were reluctant homeschoolers. Like they didn't actually want to homeschool. They just didn't want to go to school. So they're really, two types of homeschoolers.
Well, they didn't want to homeschool, but they had no choice because they didn't want to have the vaccinations for their children, either because they're against vaccinations or because their children would have been harmed by them because they knew that they were susceptible, like they were.
Yes. Yeah, let me
Yeah.
get into that. So it was a culture clash to start out with. So, and I even did a podcast. Are they pro homeschooling or are they just anti-vaccine? And there are all these, like anytime you get an influx of people, a bunch of people move into the neighborhood, some people are welcoming, some people are not. Some people are saying they don't look like us, they don't talk like us.
The culture changes, right?
Right. So there's been an ongoing assimilation process in New York City. For the change is more for them than for us. Homeschoolers, they know how to self-quarantine, they know how to draw boundaries, and no one's forced to really do anything with anybody. But I did get to meet some of these new people, and like I said, they were in like nooks and crannies, and you didn't realize I was astounded by how many people it was. And it turns out there were tons and tons of people. And when you talk to them, like when I always ask people, it doesn't matter if you're sitting at the bar or sitting next to me in church or I bump into you, I'm always going to ask you where you're from, what's your story. I'm just interested. And I would always ask people, why they're homeschooling. And nowadays you can just almost say, yeah, vaccines, and half the people it's yes. And when you hear their stories, the reasons why they're homeschooling, they'll talk about their sister who was in a coma for 3 months after this, or their son who had eczema so bad that, all these things from vaccines. And you and your people probably know, you might even know more about this stuff than I do, but it's the vaccine injury club that's not publicized, that if you talk about it on TV, you're going to get audited and thrown off the air. You're going to get delisted by Google and all this stuff. So yeah, there's a huge community of people out there that were just, trying to, get by and send their kids to school normally without the vaccine. And all of a sudden they couldn't do that. And so the worst thing now that's happening is that this virus is going to probably, I'm sure you have a lot of strong thoughts on this too. It's probably going to make the vaccine enforcement even more militant. And they're talking about medical martial law and how you can't go anywhere without showing your papers that you're fully vaccinated.
Yeah,
you're up to
they're
date
saying it'll have an RFID chip. You won't be able to get your driver's license. You won't be able to pay do taxes. I mean, there's just talk. It's just talk at this point, but it is infringing upon our freedom and our rights, especially when you understand the complexities of vaccines. they're making it so that you can't even people who are pro-vaccine. And again, I try to stay neutral because I'm not here to I don't know, fearmonger. I'm not here to tinfoil hat anyone. I'm just asking people to please question things. Don't
Do their own
do their
research.
own, please do your own research. Please just question. I had someone message me once after a really great interview about vaccines, and she's like, I've been listening for a while. I really love your show, but I'm really confused. Why isn't the flu shot great? I thought it was like the best thing in the world. And it's just people believe what they've been told by their doctor or by some TV commercial or by some news broadcast and or by what their mom said. I remember I got a flu shot. The last time I got a flu shot, I was like 18 years old. I mean, this is back in the 90s. And I remember my chiropractor was giving them. She thought it was the best thing in the world. My mom said, this is a new thing out. We can get vax. This is in Canada. We can get a shot and we won't get the flu. All I mean, and the thing is, like, my mom and I saw naturopaths. We ate non-processed foods. We ate. It was like a paleo diet at the time. They didn't call it paleo, but we didn't eat processed foods. We got a lot of sunlight. We took our vitamins. We never got sick. I mean, never. I have no idea why my mom was so excited about the flu shot, but she was told by her chiropractor that it was like the best thing in the world and we'll never get sick if we get this flu shot. And so we both got it, and we got so sick from it. We were sick for 2 weeks. We were so violently sick from this flu shot. And my mom and I just turned to each other and were like, what were we thinking? This is ridiculous. And I had no idea that there was heavy metals in it, that there was a fetal tissue in it, that there was DNA from other animals in it, that there was, I mean, just like the list, you go down the list of ingredients. I had no idea. But it definitely didn't make me healthier. And that had me just a little bit back in my mind, like, oh, wow, interesting that that could happen, right? Because it was sold to us that they only talk about how it's healthy. So my thing is, like, when someone tries to sell you a man-made drug or treatment and they only tell you the good and they don't tell you the bad because everything is a side effect. And they only tell you the good. And then if you ask if you just question, if you just go, hey, that sounds great. Can you tell me about the bad? Or, hey, why can you tell me about the ingredients? Or, hey, can you tell me about the studies that make this to prove that it's safe? And all of a sudden, people come at you and attack you personally. Oh, you're an anti-vaxxer. And you start getting attacked personally just by asking questions. You weren't attacking the drug or the treatment. You were just wanting more information. But if someone is attacked for asking for information, then you know that there's something up. So there's a culture that's been created that it's not safe to ask questions around vaccines.
It's the expert culture.
What do you mean?
People, you can't get on TV unless you're somehow seen as an expert. And they assume, people, they have a degree from here, a PhD from there. Just because someone's on TV, I've been on TV, that doesn't make me an expert. What makes someone an expert is the results that they get. And who needs experts? Oh, people who can't think for themselves. Oh, who can't think for themselves? Oh, well, people educated by a system. People who never even planned out their own day until they were 22 years old, if ever, right? So we have the school system is an obedience system, and it has lobotomized brains where people can't think for themselves. And we all have friends and family members. If you ask them their opinion on something, every single word that they say, you'll know is straight from, a certain publication. They literally can't form their own opinions. It's called received opinion. And this is, this is what experts need. This is what people in power need. They don't need or want anybody who can think independently. And going back to what type of kids are we going to raise? If we don't teach our kids to be able to, think critically and understand that people on TV, people in the media, politicians, that they have an agenda. If they don't see that, then they will take a lot of things at face value. The flu shot you're talking about. Now, do you know that they actually pay you to get the flu shot now? Did you know you get a $25 Amazon gift card?
Oh my gosh.
So they started out saying, "Oh, it's only $60," and then it was only $25 or $30. Then it was only $17 at CVS. They got it into the retail establishments. Now, if you get a flu shot, they will give you a $25 gift card. That started, I believe, this year. Your viewers can Google that. But yeah, they're literally paying you to for this loyalty oath, and it is a loyalty oath. It's a faith in science, faith in doctors. It's its own pseudo religion. Meanwhile, the medical, what they know about the body is still like zero. I mean, the body is a mysterious thing, and no one should ever speak with certainty about a treatment, about a medicine or anything, because they really don't know. They have, and this is, my brother taught me this term years ago, a God complex, and I had to look it up. And this was before Google, but a God complex is a belief in infallibility. And if you go to a doctor and say, "Hey, well, what about this, this, and this?" Not only are they going to call you an anti-vaxxer, they're going to call you a Google mommy. And there are a lot of complicated reasons. Well, first of all, that doctor has been giving that vaccine to thousands of people. He in his own mind, he can't one day think, maybe I've been hurting people. So when a person's income and their livelihood and their ego depends on them doing a certain thing, they're not going to be easily moved or easily encouraged to reevaluate that. It's just human nature. We all kind of dig ourselves in, and so there's that too. But a friend of mine got in Florida, in Naples, Florida. His son got a round of vaccinations when he was real young, and his son came home and started staring at ceiling fans and just dazing out. And he said, "Oh boy." He didn't know what it was. He's Googling. He became a Google daddy, and he found out that it looked like his son was craving carbs. And I'm just telling you what he told me, that his son got a diagnosis out on the edge of the autism spectrum. Okay, whatever. Daughter comes along next year and a half, same doctor, and he says to the doctor, I want to pass on this round of vaccinations. The doctor started dropping F-bombs on him and told him to get the bleep out and go find a new bleeping doctor. So, you talk about being called a Google mommy is one thing, but trying to find a doctor who will take you, that's a whole other. The homeschoolers in New York have had a hard time finding doctors who will even take them on, finding pediatricians, because there's been this, even before they started ramping up the forced vaccinations, they were going up to doctors and saying, "Well, we're not going to give you insurance if you don't have a 98 or 99% vaccination."
Premera actually pays a bonus. In certain states, Premera pays a bonus if they have a certain percentage of vaccines. So it is such a good bonus that it keeps the lights on. It's the difference between profitability and loss for these pediatricians. Wow. And so, this was covered. I've had this covered in an interview, but it was covered a little bit in The Truth About Vaccines, which is a docuseries, but it's also I have had a few interviews that went into detail. I think Dr. Paul Thomas talked about it off the top of my head, and listeners can go to learntohealth.com and type in Paul Thomas. He's a great pediatrician in Portland who wrote a book called Safe Vaccines, and he's not anti or pro. He's actually pro informed consent. He wants to give you all the bad with all, you're told all the good. Here's actually all the bad, and you should know both sides, and you should know what to do instead. Half of his practice chose not to vaccinate, or actually maybe a bit more. And during flu outbreaks when I interviewed him, there was a massive flu outbreak. The hospitals in Portland had 6-hour wait times. This was about 2 winters ago. I don't know if you remember,
2018.
but there was a big flu scare. And all the hospitals in all the cities were just completely slammed with influenza. His clinic has 4 doctors and a few nurse practitioners, and it's a big clinic, and they have thousands and thousands of patients, over 10,000 patients. Friday afternoon, they're kind of expecting, because they called around, they found out that every hospital in Portland was like a 6-hour wait because of influenza. They said they went home early Friday. They got 0 phone calls from the parents. None of their patients were sick with influenza. And so they actually went home early because they were just like, okay, we can wrap it up. Everyone's fine. Whereas they were expecting to be slammed also. But he said he attributed that to the fact that the children, they take vitamin D, they get plenty of sunlight. He educates his patients on how to eat healthy, not junk food, but how to eat healthy, real food. And they choose not to vaccinate, and they choose to do alternative things other than vaccination. And so he sees it in his practice. You say expert opinions. He sees it in his practice that the children who get to run outside, who are homeschooled, who get to, eat real food, and who aren't put on a ton of drugs, they're the ones who have really healthy immune systems.
What about stress too, right? How much does constant stress reduce the immune system? And I'm not an expert on it, but I'm pretty sure that there's a high correlation between vulnerability and the amount of stress that kids who are studying for math tests every week and being woken up early, not getting enough sleep, who are on devices all the time, and who are just constantly being pushed, poked, and prodded. I mean, stress is a big deal. I tell my kids all the time, like, I could yell my head off at them all day long, and they wouldn't experience the natural organic stress of being in school, being under a microscope, of having kids. No, I'm 100% serious, of always worrying about, am my pants a little too purple, or this, or my hair, do I have a big zit on my face? What's this person going to say? Is this person going to, the constant accumulated micro stresses of being in school. And look, every personal development expert knows the concept of a mastermind is that you go join a group of other entrepreneurs or other social circles where people are operating at a high level, and just by being in that group of fast charging achievers, you level yourself up. Right. Like they level you up. But what happens in school on so many different levels is that because it's age graded, that the students all pool their ignorance. So the fourth graders,
the lowest common denominator. It's the Homer Simpson model. It's like this. You look at The Simpsons. Why are shows that are about, and I choose The Simpsons because I learned the idea of the lowest common denominator back when The Simpsons were really popular, and it was kind of like,
wait, not in math class?
Well, it's ideas that, like, why is it that the Fox, for example, or whatever, these CBS, why do they put out shows that are so dumb, that are just like, they're funny, but they're like really dumb, right? And it's this idea that they need to appeal to the lowest common denominator, like let's dumb everyone down so that everyone can participate in this the entertainment that's dumb, right? Instead of trying to raise people up. And so this idea that's like, let's get everyone like Homer Simpson, right? Where we're all kind of like dumbed down together instead of challenging people to pulling them up. So
it's low expectations, right? So I think it was Condoleezza Rice. I think she was working with the Bush 2, and she's talked about an expression, or she bantied about an expression, the bigotry of low expectations. Like, if you have low expectations of people, they'll never break through that ceiling, right? You have to have high escalating, even if you're a parent, right? If your kids were doing the dishes and making their bed this month, well, what can you add to that next month? Like, you have to be pushing people. They have all this potential. They respond to it. They feel respected when you ask more of them. But yeah, it's not just the TV, the newspapers. I remember years ago them saying that, going back into the 80s, that newspapers were now written at a 4th and 5th grade level. And online, they say, oh, keep your videos short. Use one-word sentences. Use one-sentence paragraphs, because nobody has any attention span.
My shows are like 2 hours long. I probably could get more listeners if it was like a 5-minute show, but it would be, again, appealing to the lowest common denominator. And I want to raise people up. I want to dive deep into these discussions and pull information out of the brains of the guest, and enrich the listener as much as possible. And so we have to challenge ourselves so that we can rise up. Now, this brings up my question about like the practical application. So my 5-year-old son, back when he was 2.5, he loved doing this. He loved, pick up a pen, start writing. But now he's fighting me. So this idea, and I'm watching my friends' kids who like don't want to do chores, and you're saying like, what can you add to the list next month? It's like, well, what about the children who are defiant, or the children who are like, they don't want to do that. They don't want to sit down and do math work. They don't want to do the dishes. They don't want to do their bed. Like, how do you get to the point where they're excited to do it and they want to do more, and they feel that the responsibility is you respecting them, and they're excited about the responsibility? How do you flip it so that they go from defiance to like excitement?
Well, you can't always. Some children are actually that ODD, that oppositional defiant disorder. There are some children who feel so they feel so uncomfortable doing anything that they're told that if you say up, they'll say way down. If you say yes, they'll say no way. And they're just even to their own self like destruction. Like, this will be hard for you if you do it this way. They don't care. They really have trouble. The good thing about those kids is that they will not just listen to the authorities, and they will be you've probably heard the expression, the strong-willed child. I'm sure there are books about the strong-willed child. And one thing we say about my daughter, because my daughter is in this category, my kids are opposite. My son will do anything that you ask him, but only what you ask him. And my daughter will do like nothing that you ask. So I actually have two polar opposites. They each need to, he needs to be a little more self-motivated, and she needs to be a little more receptive to people who are wiser than her, and even people who, pay the bills. Maybe you should do this one thing. But what we say about her is that, euphemistically, well, she has leadership qualities. She's not a follower. But to answer your question specifically about Brave, now, some kids don't like math because of the curriculum. Some kids don't like math because they're just testing, whether or not it's optional, right? And you get tests, they get tests, you get tests, and sometimes the kid there's like a 5% chance they may have dyscalculia, where they have trouble like seeing 3 fingers as 3 real quickly. But in my experience, there's a lot of things you can do, especially if you have the ultimate leverage and flexibility that is homeschooling. There's a lot of things that you can do with him. So, for example, if he's 5, I'll even walk you through specifically what I would do with him. I would have him, count by 2s. So he can count, I'm sure. So the first thing, we'll start with young kids. Count to 30. Great. Count to 60 by 2s. Great. Now count by 3s to 90. Count by 5s to 150, 10s to 300. And we just skip count over and over and over and over again. This is a Karate Kid drill that can be done verbally in a car while you're driving, when you're walking. It can be done on paper. And we can add many, many layers of complexity to it. So we would say, well, how do we add 10? 17 plus 10, well, it's 27. The kids can pick that up. Well, how do we add 9? Well, we go up 10 and we come back 1. Great. I want you to count by 9s to 270. So we start with 9, and we say, well, it's not 19, we come back 1. It's 18. It's not 28, we come back 1, 27. And they learn to count by 9s up to 270. Then they learn to count by 8s. And then we learn to count by 7s and 11s and 12s. And then we count backwards. We say count from 270 to 0 by 9s. And so we do these same self-mastery drills over and over and over and over again. And we time them. There's a time component. Like, to count by 9s, it took them 4 minutes. You write it down. They can see now it took them 3 minutes. Next thing you know, it's a minute and a half. And they feel good about what they're doing. They can see their progress. They know they couldn't do it. They remember they couldn't do it a week ago. And now they're starting to own the numbers. And this is all without word problems. It's all without Common Core. And it just keeps it very simple. I mean, math is very, very important. But it's become lost that on the public, with the Common Core mishandling of it, that math is a foundational skill. My whole life was built on math. And I was captain of my math team in high school, and we won the New England Championship, which is at the time one of the most competitive leagues in the country. And I look back, and my kids, everything I've been able to do with them, read thousands of books, win chess tournaments, play multiple instruments, all these things that we've been able to do, build entrepreneurship, it's all built on math. Math is, like I said, school is ruining kids for reading. It's also ruining everybody for math. And in the homeschooling world does not do a good job with math because, they don't know what to do, right? And so they don't know what's different about school math. They tend to use a lot of manipulatives and stuff. But the rigor of school math is important, and we have to kind of infuse our homeschool math with some rigor. And so the number one tip I have for infusing rigor is to do it every day, first thing. If you try to do math at 3 o'clock after he's been running around all day, or 8 o'clock after you've been working all day at night, it's not going to happen. So my top tip for not just everyone else, but myself included, is you get up and you do math right away. The first academic subject you do is the toughest one. And even if it's 30 minutes or 40 minutes or 20 minutes, you just do it right away. And then the rest of the day will run downhill. And I can definitely give you all these, what would you say? I can give you like a lot more. I can give you some videos to watch on the skip counting, and I can even give you a link so that your listeners can see exactly what I'm talking about. It might not come over the air so expertly, but we do basic drills with paper and pencil, and this skip counting drill will teach your kid addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and even factoring, all in one swoop. It's like the most powerful drill that I have all my little 4 and 5-year-old math genius students doing and really enjoying. And so that's kind of like the building block that I have for math before we even go on to algebra and stuff. We have this one thing here. What else do you want to know? What else can I help you? Is it the pen that he doesn't want to touch, the pencil, like specifically?
Oh no. It's the act of now sitting down and doing it. It's like he would rather be doing something else. And so we'll do one page of schoolwork, and as we're going through, he goes, "Can we just do one page?" And I'm like, "No, we're gonna do more." And then he's halfway through the next page. Can this be the last page? And it's just the constant, you're like, when's this gonna be over? When's this gonna be over? And then anytime I go, okay, it's time to do schoolwork, he's like, no, and he runs away from me. And it's funny though, because he started out really loving it, and then something shifted, and now he doesn't like it. But I see it in other parents and other kids, So I thought it'd be great in general to especially parents who are now stuck with their kids at home because of the COVID-19, and they're not used to getting their kids to sit down and do work, and then they're finding that their kids are, oh, I'd rather watch TV, I'd rather go play my video game, I'd rather chat with my friend, I'll do that later, no, I don't want to do that right now. Like, what's a way to, instead of punishing
Compliant.
them, because the thing is,
Yeah.
like, I started saying, like, you're going to get a timeout. Like, I started, bringing out the stick, right, instead of the carrot. And it's just now he's associating, like now it's a punishable offense to not do schoolwork. So now schoolwork is punishment, right? So it's like, geez, how do we get this to be fun again? What he loves doing is, like, leave him on his own. He's like, I'm gonna go do a science experiment. Like, all this morning he was playing with baking soda and vinegar, and he really, really wants to make science experiments. And he wants to make things explode and like make, like elephant toothpaste and stuff like that. And we've got an ant farm, and he's all about, like finding bugs and, worms. He helps me in the garden. And so he's really like about learning about insects. And so if it's something like he's really excited about, we could do that for hours. But when it comes to the things that he isn't excited about, he's just fighting me on it, which I think, is kind of normal for some kids. And so if other parents are struggling with that, like, how can we turn it around so that the kids, how do we help the parents go from crisis schooling to homeschooling, where it's actually, where it's really so getting the child excited and motivated about their education?
Well, look, all that stuff he's doing with science experiments, that's awesome. So you're playing with you have a lot of currency to play with, and there are a lot of people who can never get their kids to show such enthusiasm and such curiosity and focus. That's good, but I maintain that if you add in the rigor of the math, and I'll give you a couple tips on how you can get it in, that stuff will go to the next level. Like
Mm.
that stuff, like this goes back to what I was saying. Math is incredibly important. All of our life, we're trying to figure out problems. We have to put them on paper. We have to deal with abstract issues and try to identify variables and solve for unknowns. I mean, math is actually a powerful tool. Actually, doing algebra itself is not, but the mindset, the discipline that you need to have to do that, like that's transferable into everything. So again, in the morning, and I call it math for breakfast. You do math right away. And for some kids, they say, well, you're not eating breakfast until it's done or until half of it's done. So for some kids, you only have to do that once, and they realize it's a lot easier to do it. Now, I understand your reluctance to, do use punishment, but the reality is that the world punishes our lack of discipline, right? Like, so if we're preparing our kids for the outside world, and the real world is going to be way harsher on our kids than we could even ever. I mean, you're 40 years old too. I mean, the real world will chew you up and spit you out a million different ways. And it's like, so like having your kid do 20, 30 minutes, an hour of math, like that is not going to destroy their love of learning. That is not that. What that's going to do is that's going to say, hey, in the real world, sometimes you got to do things you don't want to do. And like, again, you would use incentives. With my son, John, we'd have a Lego set on top of the refrigerator when he was young. And I said, when you finish these 3 workbooks, you could get that Lego set with Star Wars or whatever. So he had some little thing to work towards, positively. And negatively, if my kids didn't do, like I say, we're going to do 4 pages, we're on 16, I turn the page, I circle the 4th page, any lip, whining, bad job, distracting the other kid, whatever, oh, now we're doing 5 pages. And they, you just do it like you would do all disciplining, the way all these experts teach you, just do it dispassionately, and we'll do an extra page. That's it. And if they complain, it's another extra page. And you have to let them know that they can't go out into the real world and complain about things that they don't want to do. And you're raising your expectations like every week, every month, or whatever. And like 20 minutes, 30 minutes of math, he can handle it. He sounds like he's very bright. And as a homeschooling parent, math is a major pain point because it involves like a lot of stress, and people feel like they're failing their kids if they don't do math. Math is the one subject that you have to generate momentum in, because everything is built upon that which comes before it. You can't take a month off from math. In school, they take 2 months off in the summer from math, and every year the kids slide back 2.4 months. And this is why if you buy a Kumon book or any other math workbook, if you buy a 3rd grade math book, you'll see the first 15 to 20% of it is review. They assume you're going to constantly slide back. And so like math is like my only thing. If I were to say there are 2 things you can't do without, it's math early on. It's for the kid as a building block. It's also for mom and dad to generate some self-confidence. And then they can do whatever they want the rest of the day. So math, and then reading, and they can do whatever they want the rest of the day. If they just did an hour of math and an hour of reading and or writing like free writing, transcriptive writing, like from 8 to 10, if they just did that, they would probably be qualified to almost get into Harvard. just those 2 habits. But you can't take the summers off. You can't take like weeks off. Like we're on spring break this week. Well, look, mommy's not on spring break. Mommy has to do dishes. You don't get breaks, just 2 hours a day. And it would be automatic. Like they wouldn't even know that it was like optional, right? To not do it. They would, a fish doesn't know that it's wet. It's just normal to get up every day and read and whatever. And the reading thing, like, look, not enough people understand that reading is like the homeschooling parents' secret weapon. I used to drive to Florida from Boston and New York with 2 little kids in my car, and my wife wasn't with me, and we wouldn't put a movie on or anything. They would read the whole way. The homeschooling families who have done the complete screen detox and have turned their kids into raging bibliophiles, they have so much leverage because they can take their kids anywhere. Like I used to take my kids on on consulting gigs, and I would sit and I would work with other families, and my kids would sit on a couch for 3 hours, like 10 feet away, and not move. And my client just couldn't stop looking at my kid. Like, how do you get your kid to sit like that? What parent doesn't want their kid to be able to sedate themselves, to fire up their imagination, expand their vocabulary, and and all those great things, with a book, right? They're sedating kids with devices and with,
Dumbing them
overscheduling.
down.
Overscheduling too. So someone sign them up for activities. It's 2 days off from school. It's 1 day off. It's Martin Luther King Day. I got to sign them up for something. Like, really? 1 day?
I love it. I love that idea that the children are jumping into books, and that instead of jumping into screens, and that's enriching them. Now, what do you think about learning from screens? Because I see in some homeschooling groups, oh, ABC Mouse is so great. Oh, I just, my son's doing a lot of tablet learning. What do you think about that?
It's not good. It's definitely not good.
Can you cite studies, or what's your experience to show that it's not good?
You can, it's that books are so much better. It's that moving their bodies is so much better. And anything that gets between a child and bibliophilia, I want out, because books are so, so important, right? I was just telling my wife this yesterday that, someone was saying, oh, my kid, I was showing them the flashcards, and they were identifying numbers, 1, 2, 3, 8, 9, 10. And when it came to the 11 number, they said pause. They thought 11 meant pause. And there are kids, they're saying in kindergarten, that come in, they give them a real book, and they don't know how to turn the page. They're trying to swipe to turn the pages of a physical book. Look at a child who's on a tablet. Look at their posture.
Oh, it's horrible.
They're not going to blink. They're not going to be moving their bodies. And we haven't talked about it, but this is a health podcast, and I should definitely bring it up. Fine motor skills. Fine motor skills is something that people don't have any clue about, and I honestly had no idea either. I thought that cursive handwriting was utterly useless, and then I saw some guru talk about how it's been proven that nothing fires up the brain like cursive handwriting. And they put the electrodes on the head, and they show that when you write the cursive handwriting, and ideally cursive handwriting on a blank sheet of paper, is a very powerful, intense brain exercise. And so I saw this guy, and then I went down into this rabbit hole of, hit the gurus behind the guru. And not only did I start changing my homeschooling approach and incorporating more writing in cursive, but personally, what I do every day as a form of active meditation is I do cursive handwriting. And what I'll do is I'll write out famous quotes by Einstein or Lincoln or Oprah Winfrey or whatever. I'll write it out in my best cursive, right-handed, and then I will take the pen and put it in my left hand. And I will write it out going from the right side of the page back to the left in reverse mirror image cursive. And what I'm doing when I do that is I'm using both sides of my brain, and I'm cultivating ambidexterity. And the gurus behind the guru, they've basically proven that all these geniuses, like going back to Leonardo da Vinci, were ambidextrous, and that the rest of us are using half of our brain when they're using their whole brain. I think it was Michelangelo when he was painting the Sistine Chapel, for hours and hours and hours, paintbrush overhead, hoisted up there. When he got tired with his right hand, he would just switch to his left hand. Leonardo da Vinci could write with one hand and draw with the other one. He was pretty much, some people consider him to be smarter than Einstein, but he could write with one hand and draw with the other simultaneously, right? So lost in what's going on with the shift to screens is that kids don't get enough time wielding a pencil. And we kind of take it for, you and I took it for granted. How many times did we get a piece of paper and write our name and our date and just go? But nowadays, with Khan Academy and with all these online classes and with millennial teachers who are giving kids forms and multiple choice stuff, bubble tests, because it's easier for them to grade, the kids are not using their hands. They're not using their hands to knit and sew, and they're not exercising their fine motor skills, whittling things, or just not using their hands. And so the net effect of that is that they're not developing their brain with the most powerful tool that they can. Like I said, it's been proven that cursive handwriting is like the best exercise you can do. Now, I started teaching math, I don't know, 10 years ago officially to other kids, and I started noticing their pencil grips, and they had these caveman grips. You couldn't even understand how they could wield the pencil that way. And this was like my introduction to it, and I started to see, like, you don't notice anyone's a parent until you're pregnant and have a kid yourself, and you don't notice anyone has a Toyota Camry until you start shopping for Toyota Camrys. But I didn't notice anybody's pencil grip until I started doing this, and it's gotten worse and worse over time. And one of the reasons is these kids aren't getting enough time with the paper and pencil, and so one reason is not getting enough reps. The other reason is that the hyperstimulation of video games and SpongeBob and TV, it actually fries the part of the brain that controls fine motor skills. So the video games are making it so these kids not only can't use a pencil or a pen properly, but they hate it. Like, you think they hate books, they hate writing like you would not believe. So then they get to math, and there are a lot of kids, and I've had a lot of, especially boys and girls, who are good at math. They know that 8 times 7 is 56, and they're just good with it. They understand it. But then they get to pre-algebra and algebra, where they have to write out step by step. You have to use scrap paper. You have to do a lot of work, multi-step calculation and computation. And because they hate the pen and the pencil so much, they won't write 3x plus 7 equals 85, 3x equals 78, divide both sides by 3. They won't do it because, again, they have this weakness. It's almost like somebody who has no wind, no stamina. They're out of shape. Well, they can't play soccer if they don't have the cardiovascular training to move to get to the ball. These kids that can't wield a pencil or a pen, they don't have the fine motor skill cardio to be able to sit down with paper and pencil. And look, there's a reason why that the top, I wonder if you know this or not, but the top selling book categories on Amazon are adult coloring books.
Yes.
And the reason is it's a form of active meditation. You're forced to focus. It's taking you out of that multitasking, hyper distracting state where we have inbound on social media, text messaging, and whatever. It's really, really good for the brain. And so I'm dead set against all this fake tablet education. I have yet to see a kid, and I've met a lot of kids who are super accelerated geniuses who was on the device a lot. I have never seen one. All my kids who are at super high levels, 4, 5, 6 grade levels above normal, they're not on screens at all. So I know they're not necessary. And, I actually believe that they're pretty bad on several fronts. Hopefully in that long-winded answer, you could catch wind of a couple of those fronts where I see it's risky, right? You're opening a Pandora's box. You give a kid an iPad and they tilt it away from you, and their friend shows them how to do this or that. And their ability to be sneaky on that is, it's like sending lettuce by rabbit, right? Like it's not going to get there. And it's just you're playing with. You give a kid an iPad, and look, have you seen this at the airport where you're going through airport security, and a kid has a device, and they have to put the device through the machine? I've seen it multiple times where they have to take the device from the kid, and the kid has an absolute meltdown.
Yep. Because
they don't want to put the device through the metal detector for a minute. And it's really. I mean, I'm a little bit of. I don't know, your viewers can put their own label on me, but I will go up to people in public, or I have done it, and I'm like, why are you giving that kid the iPad? Like, they're 2 years old. Like, why do you have a mounted iPad on the stroller?
It drives me crazy when I'm at the grocery store that parents give cell phones to their children, and young children. I've never handed my cell phone to my son to sedate him at a grocery store. Like that's, I mean, I don't hand my cell phone to my son, but I'm just saying, like, it's an opportunity for learning. The whole time I'm talking to him, he's sitting in the cart. I mean, he could walk, but it's like a lot easier to have him. I mean, he could walk now. I mean, sometimes he helps push the cart. But I actually prefer him to be, he's like, him and I can look at each other. We can talk. He can see what's going into the cart, and he can help pick things out because he can see all the produce, because he's above it all, sitting in the cart facing me. And we're talking the whole time. about what's going in the cart and about what we're going to make for dinner, about what he wants. And we're having a discussion, and he says, "Oh, what's that?" I said, "Do you want to try this? Like, what kind of new vegetable do you want to try? Do you want to try a new fruit?" And sometimes he'll just start eating the kale raw, like before we bought it, because it's not weighed, it's by a bushel, like, $2 a bunch or whatever, not a bushel. And he'll just start eating it, so he's engaged. And I remember this happened recently. Him and I are talking, and I walk into the produce section with him, and there was a mom with a kid, maybe about a year and a half younger than my son, and that kid was just hunched over, neck totally hunched over, playing on a phone, and the mom was not talking to the kid at all. And it just blows my mind, because no matter how hyper your kid is, like, you can get through to them, and you can have this really meaningful conversation with them when you're doing things like grocery shopping, and it can be this incredible educational experience. My son points out things that he goes like, "Oh, grab a turnip." And I'm like, "Which one's the turnip?" And he knows which one the turnip is. I always get them mixed up with like the rutabaga, and like they all look the same to me. They're all kind of like these root vegetables. And he knew which one the turnip was, and so I grab it, and then I had to Google it. I like pulled out my phone, and I'm like, sure enough, because my husband and my son and we all go grocery shopping together because it's a fun family experience. And then we were guessing which one's the rutabaga, which one's the turnip, which one's the parsnip. I know what a parsnip looks like, but the rutabaga and the turnip, I always get them mixed up, and my son doesn't. Like, he knows, he learned it once, and he figured it out. And he was the one that got it right, and the three of us were having a bet, like, okay, who's got it right? Let's all guess which vegetables these are. And he wanted us to buy it. He goes, "Can we make pancakes out of these?" Like, just he comes up with these crazy recipes. But if your child is in a cell phone, like, they're not making meaningful connections. They're not learning about the world. They're not, especially if, like, they could be learning about food and how that nourishes the body. And my son will say, he'll actually point to stuff, and he'll say, "Does that have sugar in it? Like, what's in that? And can I have this?" And I'll read the ingredients, and he'll tell me, "Can you read the ingredients to this?" And I'll say, "Oh, no, there's, I'll list off the ingredients." And he goes, "No, I can't have that." Like, 'cause he knows he doesn't feel good when he eats certain things, and he wants to feel good. So we don't do foods that are high in sugar, or any sugar. It's like, if it's fruit, that's one thing. Like, there's natural fruit roll-ups, and that's a treat for him. There's no sugar in it. It's just like fruit concentrate. And that's that, like that. So he gets those kind of treats, but he knows to ask to read the ingredients. And I show him. I'm like, "Do you see the word sugar?" I've show him the ingredients, and he looks through, and he tries to read it, and he's getting word recognition. And he's also allergic to weird things like garlic, and so we have to really be careful. And I've shown him the ingredients. And I say, "Do you see the word garlic here?" And so it become the going to the grocery store is learning. Even now, this is the only place we can go, is the grocery store. But we can use every time we go out the door, even at restaurants, like when we look over and there's an entire family on their cell phones, the kids included. I always look at them, I'm like, how is it that every child in that family, plus the parents, all own a cell phone? Like, these things are expensive. And whereas, you can be having a meaningful conversation. There's this fun magnetic, it fits in a box, and we were given to it for Christmas by a friend. And it's all these magnets that you can put together to make a robot. And it's just like little stuff. You could bring like these puzzles, or these, like, you could bring, word games. You can bring things to the restaurant or to wherever you're going. Or you can, have the kid read the menu with you, or you can just like talk about what you want to eat, or talk about what you want to do next, and just like want to engage with your child. And versus the children that are just like glued to the screens. They're not learning how to communicate and how to engage. And I don't want to shame the parents who do that, because I know that they're doing it for a reason, and maybe they feel that it's made it easy for them, or they're stressed out and it gives them a break. And I get that. but I think what gives us a break in the short term, kind of like drinking a glass of wine every night to calm down, what is helping us in the short term is harming us in the long term. That oh, I just need this alcohol to relax. Oh, I just need my son to hold a cell phone to relax, to have a break. But that is it's the short-term gratification that actually creates a far greater long-term problem.
Well, here's a quote for you. Talking to children is as important as feeding them. That is like, you think about that. We didn't get into language skills and language acquisition. And one of the huge predictors of kids' success in life is what their vocabulary is when they're 4, 5, and 6 years old. You almost can't change it. And there are two things that, well, here's the data point. I might have given it to you way back when. I'll give it again. I think it's 1950. The average working vocabulary by this one study of a 5 or 6 year old kid was 4,000 words. Today, it's not 4,000 words anymore. It's closer to 1,000, right?
Oh
and
my
there
gosh.
are only two reasons. One is actually preschool daycare, and the other is the change since the 50s is television. And the problem with preschool daycare and television is that they crowd out conversation, right? So there are no adults talking to kids. There are no kids asking questions. They're just, everyone's on a device, or everyone's being sedated by a device, or the 3-year-old kids are off at daycare amongst other 3-year-old kids. And you can't learn any new vocab words from one of your peers. That you learn vocab words from somebody, speaking directly to you personally about something you can relate to or put in context, and that, has a bigger vocabulary than you. So we didn't even talk about language acquisition. A lot of people meet homeschool kids and they can't believe, how mature they look and act and sound. And the maturity thing is because they're not being raised amongst kids their own age, right? They're spending a lot of time with adults. But the rest of it, the rounded out education, is books, and it's the vocabulary that they are acquiring from being around, complete sentence wielding, people who don't speak in emojis and illiterate YouTube comments. Now that iPad, everybody has to understand that iPad was designed to be addictive. The people who designed it are Harvard neuropsychologists, and they are watching and trying to figure out and trying to hack, what makes an app addictive. They did this with Sesame Street back in back in 1970, when Sesame Street actually pioneered this. They would have 3 groups of kids, and they would have one in this room, and they'd be watching them like lab rats, and they would have music and sound effects and a purple graphic versus a blue graphic, and they would figure out what they had to put on the screen to keep the kids more glued to the screen. And this is going back, SpongeBob is considered to be the worst. It was rated like the worst cartoon for kids because of the number of rapid scene jumps and the overall anti-intellectual level of what goes on. But SpongeBob was built on Sesame Street. It was built on an industry that has figured out that getting you addicted to watching it is money in their pocket. If they don't get you addicted, they actually don't have a product. And that's what's going on with this iPad. They're telling you, even the marketing, go look at the marketing for all these apps. They'll tell you that it's been proven to teach kids reading and this and that. It's all baloney. It's all hogwash. I don't see any kids coming off apps doing anything great. If anything, you're introducing massive risks into their future. And I consider that personally, and it's a little bit harsh. I consider that child. I consider giving a child an iPad an act of child abuse. Just like when the doctor tells you if you don't give your kid 900 shots that you're abusing that child. Well, I think giving a kid an iPad is also, setting them up to struggle in school in terms of their personal self-esteem and all that. But what you're doing with Brave is awesome now. But imagine if you had 8 kids, right? If you have 8 kids, and I know people who can handle 8 kids with no screens and no crutches and whatever, but I only have 2 kids. It's a lot easier. Some people, they could be single parent, they could be working a job and a half, and it's not so easy to resist the call of these screens. It gets very hard to fight with your kids and have them be the only one that's not playing video games, the only one that's not on the devices, the only one that doesn't know what happened on Friends last night. Because I don't know if you know, but apparently Friends is a new show, according to the 13-year-old kids who have found it on Netflix. But yeah, Friends is it. Did you know this? It's been resurrected.
That did they come up with a new Friends? I don't know.
Walk around New York City, you'll see all sorts of young kids wearing Friends T-shirts, and there's a location up here in Lower Manhattan that has all these people standing out in front. I guess it's where the Friends apartment was seen, and there's bus tours but because of Netflix, Friends has been rejuvenated, so they think they think The Office has been rejuvenated, and so has Friends. So all the young kids
are into it. That's funny.
But if they're all talking about that, and look, I have a 13-year-old daughter, and all her friends are talking about that stuff, and there's no TV, there's no Netflix here, and she's like, why can't I watch it? This, that, like, it's not good for you. It's inappropriate, but it's very hard. And I'm a very tough person, but not everybody, can fight and win that battle or has enough bandwidth to do that. Life is hard. The reason, and let's go back to like entrepreneurship and homeschooling and education, like our whole overall mission, right? What I've discovered is that life is really hard. It gets more complicated, but problems multiply and they compound, and the things that you don't know, what you don't know about your career or your body or relationships, these grow. If you can pardon they grow like they metastasize in our lives, and we end up with kids and aging parents and all the, in financial difficulties, possibly or not. We're trying to figure out all these things for ourselves, when the root of all of it is that we didn't learn about these things. Brave probably knows what xanthan gum is. I still don't know what it is. We didn't learn about these things when we were young. There's no reason why you can't learn about personal development and nutrition when you're young. There's no age minimum that you need to. There's no reason you need to go out into the corporate world and burn out in order to learn about entrepreneurship. No, there's just a crooked path that everyone else is following, basically to nowhere, and we're all just like going along with it and waking up. I mean, I remember I was 10, like it was yesterday. You wake up, you're 40, 45 years old, and you're playing defense, you're playing catch up, you're trying to read books and learn things, and it's not good. Like, I don't want that for my kids. I want them to be playing offense from early on, like aggressive early offense, and I want them to be, future proof.
When is it a good time to introduce the computer? Because I'm sure someone's thinking, well, we're only moving more and more towards moving away from pens and paper, moving more online, moving more digital. Like we just bought a car a few months ago, and it was 100% digital. Like they had just transitioned. It was Volkswagen. I love our GTI, by the way. It's like it's the best car I've ever owned. I love this thing. It's like if you're looking for a cool car, man, it's so great. It's so great. And so I'm really happy with the purchase, but the entire experience was online. It was a digital. So we sat there at the dealership for a few hours, signing papers on an iPad and walking through everything on an iPad. And they said, yeah, we just transitioned. All of Volkswagen's transitioned to digital. I said, well, what if there's like a power outage? She said, yeah, or like we can't sell a car. Yeah, let's say, or maybe they'll break out the old papers for that. But basically the whole world's going digital. So are we doing a child a disservice by not having them learn how to use a mouse and
No.
having them learn at a young age how to type on a keyboard and use a mouse? Like, at what age should they learn how to use a computer, since their entire future is going to be on a computer?
Did Jeff Bezos grow up on a computer?
No.
No, he didn't, and he still figured it out when he needed to. He grew up with a very strong traditional academic background in a massive work ethic. Like they do. The idea that they're going to fall behind, this is like, this is a fallacy. These kids, they have these neuroplastic brains. They can pick up. You could be 5 years ahead of them on, say, like Adobe Audition. I don't know if you use that for your podcast. You could be 5 years ahead of them. They could catch you in like 3 months or maybe 5 months. there's no risk of them falling behind. In fact, they will get further ahead because they can sit down and they can operate with paper and pencil. I have a great book recommendation for your audience. It's called The Revenge of Analog. And I can't remember the author's name. I'm not going to look it up right now. But Revenge of Analog, you can put a link to it. And apparently, if you go to Google headquarters, everyone's walking around with a moleskin notebook. You know, the idea that these people aren't using paper and pencil is absolutely like untrue. Jeff Bezos, if you work at Amazon and you want to call a meeting, I believe he demands you write a 6-page paper to hand out to everybody before the meeting. You have to have writing skills to work for him. He doesn't, you know, and what do writing skills require? Well, you need to have some clarity of thought. He doesn't want you calling a meeting with some random agenda that might or might not be based on or a good idea, right? So like the idea that these kids they need to be on the device, otherwise they'll fall behind, is absolutely like misplaced. So don't let that like enter your mind. But when should you put them on a computer? Well, when should you give a child a gun, right? Say you're on a frontier 200 years ago. Your child needs that gun to hunt, to protect the family. Even if they're 11 years old, your 11-year-old needs to know how to use that gun in case, you know, Pa is off a field doing something. But when that 11-year-old learns to use a gun, Pa is right behind him, like right over his shoulder. It's a dangerous weapon. He's really not developmentally ready for all it entails. If you're going to use computers, I strongly believe you should use PCs, desktops. That's my first choice. If you saw my house back when we had a house, we had 3 PCs in a row, and I sat right next to my kids. They couldn't turn the monitor away from me. It wasn't a laptop that could disappear into the basement or anywhere, but I was right next to them the whole time. And my son learned Adobe Audition, and they played chess online, and they did Khan Academy math and IXL math, and my kids both had blogs. And like now, I mean, my kids, they work online. Right now, Christine is running an online book club, a new business she started about 2 weeks ago, where she has a bunch of kids read a book or first 5 chapters of a book, and she has a slideshow, and she's doing it over Zoom. Like there's no, you can't keep them off the computer. It's very hard unless you want to go ultra Amish or whatever. But when they're on it, they're not on it with free reign. They're not just Googling randomly. They're not watching cat videos, and you are in the room with them, right? Like it's like a must. You can't trust. So the best is a desktop PC next to mom or dad. The second best is a laptop, but I don't like those either. But then the iPad and the iPhone, they get to where you're just, you know, playing with absolute fire. And, you know, they can learn coding on a PC. They don't, there's nothing that they need an iPhone or a tablet for that they can't do on a computer.
So, you know, now we have online as the best way to, especially because all the libraries, I mean, I don't know about every state and every country, but where I live, every library is closed right now for the foreseeable future. It was like until May 4th, but we might extend it longer. And they've been closed for well over a month. So, you know, we can't just go take our children. In some places in the world, we can't just go take our children and go do homeschooling in libraries and in public. So the best resource for a lot of people is online. But what subjects work best online? Like you talked about interacting with math, but you also just mentioned Khan Academy. You know, like you've mentioned in the past, people can take music lessons online or play chess online. Of course, the parent is looking over the child. But I mean, what should we do offline, and what are some really good online resources?
Okay, well, let me just tell you that math is good online in the sense that, like, if your child filled out a worksheet, just say addition or multiplication, they could get all the answers wrong. They could be doing it incorrectly. Someone has to manually correct it and then come in and say, hey, you did it all wrong, redo it. If you do math online, the major benefit is what I call instantaneous negative feedback. Like you get corrected like right away, like boo, the buzzer goes off. So that is definitely good. If you have multiple kids, you kind of have to use, like if you have 5 or 6 kids, you have to use They're all at different levels. You can't have one math class. I mean, you can use some of my drills. You can use simultaneously at different starting points, but you have to use the computer when you have a lot of kids. And so math lends itself well towards that. I mean, Khan Academy is, anything that's got Bill Gates money in it is always a little bit messed up. And there's sections to skip and, best practices. And if you use it incorrectly, you could end up thinking it's stupid. But guess what? It's free. And it's not stupid. It's not fatally flawed. It's just imperfect, like everything else on this earth. And I have almost all my students, except for my super high level math genius students, on Khan Academy. So like, there's no risk to like using it. But chess, if you were a chess teacher and you went and hired someone and they met you, they would be constantly moving pieces and setting the board up back and forth. And it's very labor intensive to create all sorts of positions to get the child to study or to think about, what would happen here, or what's the benefit or the risk here. On a computer, they can preload all sorts of positions in, and they can hit the forward back button and the back button. So chess actually is way better. The teaching power of chess, like online, is far superior to anything that could ever be done online, right? One-on-one instruction, like not necessarily apps, because I don't really like Duolingo that much, but you can hire somebody overseas to teach your kids a foreign language very, very cheaply. $10 an hour, you could do really, really well. My brother hired a Ukrainian professor to teach him Ukrainian for something like $3.50 an hour. So you're not using it like ABC Mouse, like you're using it, for one-on-one lessons. And I would even encourage parents to use it, for research, right? Like how often does a kid ask you something and you say, well, let's Google it.
Yep.
Right.
Totally.
I mean, they learn Google image is like the coolest thing in the world for kids. And I had them make up flashcards. Like you can go to Google, Google Slides, and you just drag a picture of, a huge rock in there, or a quartz rock. And on the next slide, it says quartz. And you can create your own flashcards. I had my kids blogging when they were 4 and 5 years old, and they were just sharing what they were learning. And they had to like Google one thing a day. And so, you don't need the apps. The apps are, it's like, the library. Yeah, we suffer from the closed libraries here too. But you probably have books in your house that they can read.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the brave can read. Everybody has books in their house, or their neighbor has books in their house. And you know what? Not long ago, people used to have 1 or 2 books, and they used to read it over and over and over and over and over again. In real bibliophiles, which my kids are, they read the same books over and over and over and over again without any loss of, enjoyment. So yeah, it's like everything else. You got to make do with what you have. You're camping for a little while. You can't get to the libraries, and that does stink. But personally, I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. I have a lot of books on my bookshelf that I bought or someone gave me, and I haven't read yet. So just, work through, what you have. Resourcefulness, right? Like the confinement, the virus, whatever you want to call it. This is a constraint. And even Jeff Bezos is a big believer in constraints. He's like, you got to have constraints around you so that you can invent your way out.
I love this. I love this because I read this amazing article about Dr. Seuss that he was challenged to write a book. I'm sorry, I don't remember his actual name. His name isn't actually Dr. Seuss. I forget what it is.
Yeah, you're right. Oh, you're right.
But he was challenged to write a book with I believe it was 50 words.
Yes,
the 50 most common sight words for children, and the constraint of that led him to write like the #1 bestseller kids book ever. And so it's that he actually talked about how the constraint of being given 50 words. Okay, here's a list of 50 words, write a book. Is like, and write a good book. That actually improved his creativity, and that in constraints. So imagine if I were to only give you 2 colors, and I said, okay, paint a masterpiece. Here's 2 color, or if I give you a constraint. And I love these challenges when chefs are given a mystery box. There's only 5 ingredients. Make like a 3-course meal. with these 5 ingredients. I love that. I do that all the time in the kitchen. It's my favorite thing. I love opening the fridge and grabbing some ingredients and just like making a totally new dish with mystery ingredients. What's about to go bad that I need to cook? Okay. But give someone constraints and it can improve their creativity. So that's kind of the thing, though, that I find that parents, and maybe I'm experiencing also, is that we don't have any as a homeschooling parent, we're left with this endless possibility. And it's like I'm kind of in this overwhelm. We have this huge miasma of just, there's so many things we could choose from. We could choose all these apps, all these things online, all these things offline. You Google like homeschooling kit or whatever, and you could buy hundreds of dollars worth of different, different curriculums. So you could, there's just too many choices. Which one's the right one? Which one's right for my child? Which one's right for me as a parent? And there isn't a constraint necessarily. Now with the COVID-19, we do have more of a constraint because I can't like go out and meet up with other homeschooling groups in person and also go to the library. But I think we have too many choices, and that leaves us kind of feeling like the grass is always greener. No matter what I choose, there's probably a better program out there. Am I doing this right? Could I be doing it better? And I know that there's sometimes this feeling that there's too much. Now you have so much experience. You not only homeschooled your own children who are doing phenomenally well. You've coached other families to homeschool and dial in their homeschooling, and you've created a program to teach parents how to do it. And I know that you're giving a fantastic, you've created a package for the listeners. So the link is going to be in the show notes of the podcast, einsteinblueprint.com/LTH, and that link's going to be in the show notes. Can you address this idea that, there's so many choices? How do we know as parents, like, we're on the right track, we're making the right choice? And what, should we do this sort of like free schooling, or should we go buy a curriculum somewhere? Should we go buy an online curriculum or a physical like curriculum where there's like 20 books and textbooks that are mailed to us? What, right? Like I've seen this you join a few homeschooling Facebook groups, and there's always some of them trying to sell their curriculum like this giant box. And I've seen this one, oh my gosh, this one parent had like a room full of textbooks, and they homeschooled all their kids, and now they're just selling all of them. And it's overwhelming because is that the right, oh, well, that might be out of date. Is that the right program to use? And it may be Common Core, not Common Core, so we just end up having these millions of questions. Which one's the right program for us? And,
All right.
like, I'm
So
sure you've been asked this before.
sure. So first of all, the book is Green Eggs and Ham. Dr. Seuss
That was
book.
the first book I ever read, by the way. I remember it clicking. It's sort of like, you remember when you're riding a bicycle and you're falling off and falling off and falling off, and then that you remember that moment you got balance.
Yes,
I remember
I do.
because I was a late bloomer. I was about 7 years old. I had my husband was riding a bike at age 3, so he thinks it's crazy that I couldn't ride a bike till I was 7. But I had my training wheels on until I was 7, because every time we took them off, I just fall over. And then one day I got balance, and it just like clicked, and I went, "Oh, that's what you wanted me to do," and I never fell off a bike again. And the same with reading. It's like I didn't get it. It didn't click, and I was holding that book, and all of a sudden everything fell into place, and I could read full sentences. I went from like not knowing how to read to like just everything clicked. And I remember that moment. I was sitting in the car. We were on a 2-hour drive up to the cottage, and I was holding the book, and there was a sunny day. It was a sunny morning on a Saturday morning, and everything clicked. And I read that book, and I was like, oh my gosh, I could, like, Sam I am, like, I got it. and I was so excited. And I've been looking back on my childhood, analyzing it, you know, now that I'm a parent, obviously we do this. And I now realize I wish my parents had given me more books and less TV. And I was put in front of the TV so much as a child. Um, and I wish I was put in front of a book because I loved
All right.
reading.
So let's talk about that because, and I have the same parents that just a little bit, we're just a couple of years ahead of you. The TV was the iPhone of its time.
Right.
So it was this thing because, my kids don't understand this. If you missed a movie at the theater, you could never see it again. They would actually come back like 3 years later. You'd see Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back comes back at the theater. So you couldn't see it. So the movie theater was magical and the TV was limited. Then there's this new thing called cable TV, and it had a couple of movie channels. It had this thing called Home Box Office, and it had the movie channel. And you could actually see movies that you couldn't see before. And our parents, your mom and dad, my mom and dad, they were fascinated by this thing. It's the iPhone of its time. And they didn't have any manual. They didn't know that color TV that started out with 32 cable channels was going to go to 57 and then 200 and then 1,000. And they didn't know that it was going to lead to obesity and it was going to lead to bibliophobia. And it was also going to create distortive narratives about men and women and what to expect in life and deferred adult. Like they didn't know. So it was technology is always disrupting society like at the frontier, and nobody knows what the effect is. Now let's go into the curriculum question about what do you do in the face of all these options. When most people start homeschooling, they say, I don't know what to do. What do you do? What do you do? And then that's a little bit of a joke, or it rapidly becomes a joke, because pretty soon they get in there and they say, there's all these great things I want to do. I don't know what to cut out. I don't know what to cut out. And the reality is that when we're 12 years into our homeschool here, we have to cut out some really, really important, good things, carefully chosen things, in order to do anything new. And that's just how it goes. It's an embarrassment of riches on some levels, but it's just also very hard to, when I said to my son at one point, all right, no more hour a day on the piano, you're down to a half an hour. I'm literally cutting him down on the piano. But that's the type of, real currency and leverage that you have to play with once you get going. Now, Pinterest is what I call fake homeschooling. You see all these pictures of these beautiful homes and no mess in the background. And that is not a successful or a real homeschool. That is staged. And I understand why people do it. The same reason anybody stages anything on deep-seated insecurity, marketing, whatever, fear of what other people think of them, or some type of conformity. This is what it's supposed to look like. No, you try to create this beautiful homeschool that's ripped from Pinterest. I guarantee you that it will stress you out. You will never feel like you're doing it right, and it will be contrived. It won't be real. Like what you're doing with Brave and having real conversation and doing experiments. That's homeschooling. And that's homeschooling at its absolute best. So no, stop, thinking the grass is greener, the homeschool is better somewhere else. And, it's easy for me to say, stop looking around, but practically what you want to do is you want to generate a lot of self-confidence and a lot of security in what you're doing. And there are a couple of ways to do that. But so that when you look around there and you look at Pinterest, I look at Pinterest and, it doesn't move me because I know that it's actually not true and not real. And those kids aren't, on a steeper track than mine as if it's a competition in the first place, right? So how can you get that confidence? Well, this is why I strongly advise parents to get their kids accelerated with reading and math right away. Nothing gives a kid self-confidence and nothing gives a parent self-confidence like seeing their kid, go vertical very, very quickly. That is something that that's confidence that the parents can build on. Then people are meeting your kids and they're like, whoa, what am I doing wrong? What are you doing? What, can you help me? And instead of be more aggressive with what you're doing. And that will help you worry about less what everyone else is doing in any field, right? And look, in terms of buying a curriculum, everyone when they start homeschooling says, I need a curriculum, I need a curriculum, I need a curriculum. The reality is you don't. You need a library card and a little bit of discipline, and you need a philosophy. You need an understanding of what education is, what it's not, what your goals are, and then it's very, very simple, right? When I meet with coaching clients, I say, well, what are your goals? We're not going to talk about math or reading or college or anything, and without having some goals. Like, what are your goals? And a lot of people just don't have any goals. My goals when we started out were raising academically accelerated kids. Now, they evolved. At some point, I said, you know what? I want to raise extremely well-rounded kids. And then they evolved again. And I said, you know what? I want to raise kids who are entrepreneurs this way, that they have maximum time and money leverage in their life, and so that they can really do as much as they can possibly do. So your goals will evolve, but you've got to have goals. You have to set your own agenda. You can't look at what everyone else is doing. And you're never, no matter what that box curriculum says, no matter what those testimonials say, they never work. I call them curriculum hoppers. People would rather buy a curriculum than actually read a homeschooling book and learn about the principles of effective homeschooling. They would rather buy a curriculum than sit down with mom and dad and the kids and say, well, what are our goals? What are we afraid of? What do we want to do? Where do we want to go? They'd rather just buy something and as almost like a placeholder, as almost like fake work, fake effort. People do the same thing with fitness. Oh, I'm going to join a gym. I'm going to buy $100 Lululemon pants. I'm going to buy here Peloton bike. We've got a lot of Peloton bikes coming in to my building here in the past couple of weeks. But at its root, all education is self-education. And it's going to come down to reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's all going to come down to what Albert Einstein said, that the imagination is more important than knowledge. I mean, these are very, everyone wants to complicate things. And usually when people complicate things, that's like the lazy way out, saying something is complicated. No, it's not complicated. And you don't have to make it complicated. But, Pinterest, you can pull that up and you can definitely feel inadequate, or you can feel like you're going down the wrong path. But you have to judge people by their results. Like, this is what I talked about earlier with these experts and these doctors. It's like, who do you want to take fitness advice from? From somebody who used to be hurt and is now 50 years old and ripped and overcame all sorts of problems? Or do you want to take, exercise advice from some doctor who's never run a quarter marathon? You have to look at the results.
Yep.
Right? It's very, very important to have models, to see, hey, look at this family over here. Look at how well behaved those kids are. Look at how, if they're religious, if they got God first, I want a family like that. Look at these kids over here. Look at how helpful they are around the house. Look at how advanced this one is in math. Look at how advanced these people are with, getting their kids, selling lemonade on the street and hustling and grinding. I want that. Pick and choose, find people that have achieved what you want, what you want to manifest, and then just plug into them. That's the whole, philosophy behind having mentors and role models. It's way, way more effective than trying to purchase stuff, right? And it's hard to do. I can't, you can just go to my website. All these people have told me, I wish I met you 10 years ago. I wish I met you 10 years ago. I hear it all the time. Had I known that you could be homeschooling that way, I would have done it 5 years ago, but I didn't meet you. Look, I had nobody at all to guide me. Google was very underdeveloped 12 years ago. A lot of homeschooling parents don't put what they're doing out on the web. They don't share it. And so you don't even know. You can't even plug into them. But now there are lots and lots of people out there homeschooling and sharing. Just find the ones who have teenage kids or college kids and plug into them, ask them for advice, read their books. You're better off as a homeschooling parent reading a book on the philosophy of homeschooling than you are at buying any ABC Mouse or math curriculum or complete curriculum. That's the ultimate magic pill. I'm going to buy a complete curriculum for my kids with a day planner and this and that, and I'm going to check all the boxes and all the subjects. It doesn't work. Ideally, as a homeschooling parent, you will cobble together a curriculum. You will have a philosophy. You will have goals. You will have do's and don'ts. You will have habits. You will have role models. Just the same way if you're running a business. It's the same success. The success principles are the same whether you're talking about trying to run for a marathon, train for the Olympics, run a business, or run a family, right? You have to use eclectic resources. And you have to, the more work you do on it, the more work you do in terms of gathering research, in terms of reading books, in terms of experimenting, the more work you do on your own mind and like unpacking, like, the mistakes you made, the mistakes our parents made, the things, the regrets that we have, the more work you do on yourself and like in research in general, like that's all leverage for what you can do with your kids. That'll give you confidence in clarity on what you're doing, right? And so if you're suffering from confidence, you're suffering in confidence or a little low on that, it's because you're not getting the results that automatically give you confidence. So then it comes down to like, all right, well, how can we improve our tactics, right? Not what else can we buy? Is that a good enough answer or scratching
I like it.
the
Yeah,
surface?
no, I really, really like it. I like it. Now you mentor people, and you also developed a program. When listeners go to einsteinblueprint.com/LTH, tell us a bit about the different programs that you offer so that they can understand the resources that you provide.
Okay, well, I have a consultation, a homeschooling consultation, which, if you consult with me for an hour and you buy that, I give you basically the skeleton, the overview of, I think I have about 5 or 6 hours worth of videos and content. I just basically tell you everything that I've done. So that's at the lower level. I have that introduction to homeschooling, but it's still powerful because more than half the people who buy it have been homeschooling already, and they get stuck. They hit an obstacle. They hit a ceiling. And, homeschooling is like marriage. It should get better every year. You should get closer to your
Yes.
spouse every year. If it's
Yes.
not, you've got leakage. You've got dangerous leakage. And I also have like my flagship product is called the Einstein Blueprint. And it's not the Dan Blueprint. It's the Einstein Blueprint. It's what would the ideal education look like? Well, what did Oprah Winfrey say about what was key to her success? What is Abraham Lincoln? What wisdom has he bequeathed to us? Einstein, Da Vinci, Michelangelo. And so the whole point of the Einstein Blueprint, it's broken down into 116 modules, is reverse engineering, extreme success. That's it. What does Jeff Bezos say about, writing and about constraints, things we touched on? And how can you incorporate that in the education of your children? Literally within the Einstein Blueprint, we have our kids brainwashed, inculcated in, what did Tony Robbins say about momentum? People who succeed have momentum. If you say to your 11-year-old kid, people who succeed, blank, Brave knows what xanthan gum is and all this other stuff, you want him to know that he needs to have momentum in whatever he's doing in life. You want his operating system. You want him to be like pre-programmed with all the wisdom of all the most successful people, so that he can accelerate. He can be totally hyper accelerated on every front. So again, it's not the Dan Blueprint. It's not even what I did with my own kids, because quite honestly, I didn't know this stuff when I was flying by the seat of my pants with my own kids. I've learned this over the years and through copious research and extensive work with a lot of families at all sorts of economic and financial. I mean, I've had billionaires that I work with, and I've had single moms. And guess what? The single moms do a better job, you might suspect. It's not money that people need. It's grit. It's really constraints. It's focus, right? So I've worked with a lot of people. In my Einstein Blueprint, like, it's powerful stuff. I read it, even though I've been doing this for years and years and years. I read my own blueprint. And I go back constantly to my own blueprint, to my own, like, I wouldn't say 10 commandments because there's about 116 of them. But that's what I use on an everyday basis. And someone's asked me, like, well, why is there so much personal development for the parents in the Einstein Blueprint? Well, parents are teaching their kids, like, more is caught than taught.
Yes.
Whether you're homeschooling or not, you're setting an example. You're letting the technology in the house. You have the expectations. And honestly, we know a lot of parents who spend more time helping their kids with homework than some homeschooling parents spend with their kids overall. So look, your moms and dads are responsible for their kids' outcome, no matter how bad the teacher is, how bad the school district is, or Common Core, or whatever. Principally and ultimately, we've been given these children, and we have a responsibility to give them, more opportunities than we were given. And I think it's a very exciting thing. A lot of people meet me and they get depressed. I overwhelm them. Well, yeah, this is a big deal. At the intersection of the big three categories, the big three marketing categories, money, relationships, and health, they tell you, oh, pick a category and then pick a niche within a niche. Don't try to do it all. Guess what? If it was a Venn diagram at the intersection of money, relationships, and health, at the very intersection would be education. This is where the Einstein blueprint resides. We cover, everything that we have and don't have, everything we can do, can't do, haven't done it. We can all trace it back to something that we learned or didn't learn or were, misinformed about, right? So like education is everything, and lost in all these complaints about Common Core and vaccines and college, the price of college and what everyone else is doing, lost in all that is the sheer power, the atomic, like nuclear power of what education, can do for kids. And what'll happen if they don't learn, right? If their brain, if they become lobotomized in any way, shape, or form.
You'd mentioned in our past interview, definitely recommend listeners check it out if they're interested in homeschooling or improving their homeschooling. Episode 258. You said that you experienced this, and then of everyone that you coach experiences this. Every year you do homeschooling, it gets easier. You're less and less hands-on. A 4-year-old obviously needs your, undivided attention, although you can leave them alone with a project. Like a 2-year-old definitely needs your undivided attention when they're, learning math and writing and stuff like that. But a 6-year-old who's reading on their own, you can hand them something to do. You teach them something new, hand them something to do. They can go, like you said, write a blog, they can make a slideshow, they can read a book, they can write a book, they can build a science project, whatever. Like they're more independent, and so you obviously are monitoring them, especially like you said, if they're on a computer and they have access to the internet, they should absolutely be monitored. And you just find though that as they get older, and every year that you do homeschooling, and you should do homeschooling even during the summer, even on weekends. It should be a 365 day thing that you don't take breaks from, but you also don't have to do it 6 or 9 hours a day. If you do it 2 hours a day every day, and until they move out of the house, until they're at the point where they're old enough to move out, they've actually gotten an accelerated education, because you don't have to spend those 2.5 months like you mentioned before catching up from the summer, and they accelerate much faster because it's an immersion. But every year that you do homeschooling, it's less and less hands-on as the parent, because they can pick stuff up and go do it by themselves. Like, go read that book over there, go do that project. I think the fear for some parents is, well, I don't have the time to do that because I work from home now. I can't spend 6 hours a day with the children. I have to do other, I can't spend 6 hours a day with each child. Before someone even gets into homeschooling, they put up a brick wall. I can't do it because I don't have money. I can't do it because I don't have enough time. I can't do it because I don't think it's going to work for me. Like, they come up with these limitations. But now we're at the point where they have to do it. They literally have to do it. That's why they're calling it crisis schooling. People have to do the homeschooling, either from mandatory vaccine laws or from the COVID-19, or there's, for other reasons. So they're at this point where this restriction has been placed upon them will actually increase their creativity. And they're going to start problem solving. And the light at the end of the tunnel is that the first year is probably the hardest, and which is what you expressed in our last interview. The first year or two is the hardest. And if you buckle down and get disciplined, especially like learning from the Einstein blueprint, which I love your program. I love the personal growth in the program and the discipline. And if we as parents buckle down, and with the principles you have in your program, if we buckle down now, it's the marshmallow test, it's the intelligence, emotional intelligence. for the future, because if we can really invest now for the first 1 or 2 years of the homeschooling, then it actually gets easier and easier and easier because we're handing off the education to the child, because the child's able to take on more and more and more and more um, by themselves. So like you said, right now as we're having this interview, your children are in their rooms doing their own entrepreneurial homeschooling programs. And they're not, it's like it doesn't take you don't have to stand over your child for 6 hours a day per child to do your homeschooling. How much time would you say you actually are with your children, instructing them on homeschooling in any given day?
Well, today, right now, it's 4:49, and I haven't done anything with the kids. John taught a chess class this morning. He produced and edited a podcast for one of his clients. And my daughter is actually not in the other room. She's at my wife's office on the 42nd floor across from my wife while my wife is working. She is, doing her work, her math, and she's running her book club. And I texted her and I said, don't come home. I've got an interview here. And so I haven't spent a minute with them. Now we have expectations. We say you've got to have, 4 hours of math done this week for Christine, and John has books to read, and he has deadlines with his clients. So he has clients that he actually has to answer to as well. So we have structure, but the structure is like, say you had a business and you have the business and systems and a virtual assistant and all sorts of processes in place, right? Like, yes, the goal is not for mom to go from teaching her 3-year-old phonics to teaching her 18-year-old whatever. The goal is to teach them to fish. And like I said, you want them reading, because reading, when you can throw books at them, big, ugly, nasty books written in Old English or written in science or about things they don't even want to read, if they can read, you can just throw books at them. So just to give you an example, we don't teach history or science. We just throw books at the kids, book after book after book after book. And it's a far superior education, science and history education, than anything you'd get with a Common Core textbook and questions at the end and quizzes and the stress of quizzes and tests. So yeah, you want to get it running on autopilot. And this is why these single moms and stuff, these people who have constraints on them, they do a good job, because they crack a whip and they say, look, I got to work, you got to work, and there's nobody lounging around. And so yeah, the goal is to unlock their full potential, but also, the sign that it gets, I wouldn't say it gets easier every year, because my involvement, I think life in general gets more complicated every year. As we age, we thought it looked so simple back when we were 25 and we were doing 1.5 things. But the homeschooling is not, going back to the limiting beliefs. People think it's a lot of work up front. It can be, and even if it was, it's way worth it, right? Like, my kids are not going to college, so that's going to save me probably, whatever college is, it's almost $600,000.
Wow.
So between the two of them, so we would have to earn $1 million in income to pay for them to go to college to learn stuff that's irrelevant. So we have the confidence to not send them. We have the option to not send them. And yeah, I could have been earning more money when my son was 4 or 5 if I did something else. But I was just the same way you're investing in Brave when you're having long conversations with them, even if you're tired. You're investing. Homeschool parents are investing in their kids, early. Like, you don't want to buy Microsoft in the year 2020. You want to invest in Microsoft in 1992, right? you need to invest early. Like, starting early is one of the core components of the Einstein blueprint, and it's a concept that doesn't go away, right? Like, I'm going to introduce logarithms to kids who are 8 and 9 years old. Why? Because when they learn when they're 15 on Monday what a logarithm is, and have a test on Friday on logarithms, it's extremely stressful. They could have been introduced to that concept way back when. Kids can learn about marketing and the stock market. They can learn about social intelligence and shaking hands and making eye contact and writing thank you notes. They can learn all these powerful tactics, early, right? So
Oh,
we're just
yeah. Oh,
We're just
yeah.
pulling everything forward, right? Instead of, like I said, instead of waiting till someone's 45 years old and burnt out in the corporate world and going to go find Tony Robbins, go look at Tony Robbins. You'll see all sorts of bald people in the audience, which is awesome that they're still learning. But you should also see kids there, because there's no age minimum. We're just accelerating the learning curve. Get them to travel sooner. Get them to learn about xanthan gum sooner, and all these other things. And is there sugar in that? Like huge things. I didn't know how to read a food label until I was in my 20s. I didn't even think I knew they had food labels until my future wife pointed it out to me. I still didn't know what it meant. I didn't even know what it was.
My husband keeps asking me to make a course on how to read food labels, and I keep saying, like, everyone knows how to read this, and he's like, no, they really don't. And you're just affirming that I really should just sit down and like make a course and teach people how to read labels, because I guess I just assume that everyone is a food detective like I am. It's really important. If you're gonna eat processed food, you need to know what's in the processed food. Don't put your head in the sand, man. That's like every molecule that goes in your mouth is building healthy cells or cancer cells. So, as far as I'm concerned, reading a food label is like detecting whether there's cyanide in the food. Like, seriously, it's that important to me. And my husband jokes because I'll go into the grocery store for one item and I come out a half an hour later, and he's like, "What took you so long?" If he's in the car, like our son would be taking a nap and he'd have to stay in the car because we don't trust to leave our son alone napping in the car while we go inside. Um, and so he would just be like, "Oh, you read the labels." It's true. It's like if I go in the grocery store and I'm buying anything that's not just like one ingredient, like there's broccoli, um, I'm gonna read the labels. And it's like, to me it just makes so much sense, but to other people it's like it doesn't even occur to them, right? So um you have that same mindset around homeschooling. It's like just like it's second nature. It's like you just wake up and start breathing oxygen. It's just like, you said, this, the fish doesn't even question water. But for other people, it's very foreign. It's very, very foreign, this idea of homeschooling. And so I love your program because you get into the mindset, because the first thing we got to do is handle the mindset. You keep mentioning Tony Robbins. Some people, I was surprised to find out some people don't know who Tony Robbins is. He is a personal growth guru, a great guy. I do recommend following him. He has a podcast too. And lots of YouTube videos and stuff out there. Some of his stuff, though, he swears or brings up sexual references, so I wouldn't say it's PG. You'd have to watch it first before your children can watch it. And he does that for shock effect, to break up someone's pattern. If they're stuck neurologically in a victim state, he'll say something shocking to do a break state, which neurologically interrupts um the synapses so that we can start to reprogram the person, so they stop going to that old problem and start actually coming out of it neurologically into a new problem, into a new solution. It's called a behavioral pattern interrupt, and it's part of a neurolinguistic programming method, but unfortunately a lot of times he uses foul language or sexual references or things that can really, it's a shock and awe effect. And of course, there's lots of videos where he's PG, which but you have to monitor it first before children can watch it. Um, this has been wonderful having you on the show. Again, I mean, you mentioned that we could have a 24-hour marathon. I'm pretty sure we could easily go 6 hours without blinking. EinsteinBlueprint.com/LTH. You're creating a special page for the listeners. I want you guys to go there and check it out. You have these wonderful resources. Excuse me, I gotta clear my throat. You have these wonderful resources. You're very passionate. You're obviously, well educated and well versed in this subject. And for parents who want to improve their homeschooling, and for parents who are now stuck homeschooling because of the current world events, you really are going to help cut through so much of the BS. I'm watching some of my friends sit back and wait for the public school system to come up with an online way to distance educate the children, and it's very tedious and slow. They're trying to do Zoom calls with the children. They're trying to, they're trying to implement something, but really, and it's up to each state, right, to come up with a system. The children are not going to get the last half of, for the children who, like in Washington State, had to leave school, the children are not going to get the last half of this school year. And if we just sit back and wait for the public school system to come up with a way to handle it, it is like we are like the Homer Simpson effect. It's like the lowest common denominator. Like we're just sitting and waiting to dumb ourselves down to the lowest common denominator. We can't leave our children and leave our children's futures up to this broken system. And that's why I love the work you do, because you're going to make it so easy for us to not, we don't have to get overwhelmed with the millions of homeschooling programs and curriculums out there. Like you said, we can get really distracted by those, or all those online programs, or just throwing our children in front of a tablet. Here, learn whatever, Khan Academy on this. Like, we need to get really clear on our goals, on our philosophy, and create a schedule that we do every day with our children in a way that is motivating and encouraging, in a way that enriches them and strengthens our relationship with them. Because as we encourage them, as they grow, it will motivate the whole family. The work that you do at EinsteinBlueprint.com allows us to cut through a lot of the chaos and dial in the right program for the individual family. And so you have this program that we can do as parents, and then you also do coaching with children, and you have, like you said, about 5 hours of educational videos as well. And you're going to compile all of that with a special for the Learn to Health listeners when they go to EinsteinBlueprint.com/LTH. Daniel, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I know we touched on a lot of stuff, and I want listeners to follow you. You also, your kids do stuff too, which I love. I love following your kids. How can listeners also, like your son produces podcasts for clients. Your daughter has, book club for children. How can listeners plug into what your children are doing as well?
Well, if they go to if they listen to my podcast, the Einstein Blueprint podcast, I'm always talking about and sharing the links for those. But John has a podcast right now. It's his second podcast. It's called the Kids Get Rich Podcast, and it's very good. And we're always letting people know what we can do to help them. So we'll put a link to it on your LTH page. But yeah, also there. One thing I didn't mention is I do have a dedicated math program, which has nearly 100 hours of me teaching math to my students, one-on-one instruction. It has all the drills I use, and it basically is an extremely low price. So we'll have a link to that. We call that my 100X math program. We'll have that because math is a pain point and everybody needs it. I haven't met anybody who doesn't need my math program. We'll have a link to that. And it's currently closed, but we'll put a link for your listeners to get in on that. And it'll be at a negligible cost too.
So they can't buy it, like if they go to your website, but they go to EinsteinBlueprint.com/LTH, they'll be able to get it.
Yes, I closed it. I launched it. I always launch things at a very low price, and then I build them up and work intimately with the group that's there. And then I add more value and I raise the prices. But yeah, they can get in on that at the price that I launched it at, which is very negligible. It's like $80 a year or something like that. And so we'll have a link to that. The last thing that I want to say is that, like, the reason this is such a big deal, like parenting, right? Like when we were in high school or whatever, it was popularity, it was sports, there was all these things going on, boyfriends and girlfriends. But like right now, at this stage of our life, our past, our entire past, our whole present, and our also our incoming future, it's all wrapped up in our kids. Like, this is why it's such a big deal. There's an expression, it's no other success can compensate for failure in the home. I believe it was David O. McKay, I think he's a Mormon, who said that. So I'll say it again. No other success can compensate for failure in the home. Like, we could do all these wonderful things and have a great marriage and whatever, but if our kids are going to struggle in this world, it's going to haunt us till our last days. And at the same time, being a parent and having kids, it sheds a light on so much of what went wrong, or let's call it our imperfect past. So all these things come to the fore. And I hope that none of your listeners are getting stressed out by anything that we're talking about here. We're talking about it with such passion and with such certainty because it's so, so critical. It's not, like as Ashley said, to condemn or to shame anyone. I mean, if you saw me when I was in I call them my deformative years, I was very far off course. And this is the wonderful thing about human potential and about life, is that, like, we can break bad habits, that we can tap into our inner genius. I never thought I was creative for a minute my whole life. Now I have more ideas, more creative self-confidence than I even know what to do with. But I grew up in a box. And so, like, this is an exciting thing. Having kids, being in control, being able to listen to a podcast, something that our parents couldn't do, having the internet, being able to buy things on Amazon Prime, being able to work from home. We are so blessed in this day and age to do so many things. And it's only right that we channel, all these assets into our kids, like today, like this very minute.
I love it. Thank you so much, Daniel. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show. I know you're also active in our Facebook group, the Learn Trail Facebook group. If any listeners have any questions for Daniel about his programs, they could ask it in the Facebook group. I'm sure we could have a discussion about it there. And of course, we can go to einsteinblueprint.com/LTH. It's been a pleasure having you on the show again. I can't wait to see what the future holds. Especially, I love following your children. I love watching their success because it gives us hope that our younger children are going to be as awesome as your kids are, because you gave them such a wonderful the opportunity of homeschooling. Now they're able to grow in such a beautiful way that they're not constrained. So I love what you do. I love what your children are doing. I'm really excited to see how it grows over the years. And please come back on the show every few years and continue to teach and share with us.
I look forward to that. Thank you for having me.